After becoming rich, she didn't think twice before kicking her husband out of the house, replacing him with a younger and more influential man. But what she never imagined was that years later, he would return to get his revenge in a completely unexpected way. The harsh glare of fluorescent lights flickered in the cramped bathroom of a rundown apartment in East Baltimore. Julia Reeves, 32, stood before the cracked mirror, her trembling hands gripping the edges of the porcelain sink. Her once vibrant green eyes, now dulled by years of struggle, stared back at her from the reflection. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself before facing another day of disappointment and unfulfilled dreams. "Jules, you okay in there?" Evan's voice, tinged with concern, echoed through the thin door. Julia closed her eyes, steeling herself. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just give me a minute." She reached for the faucet, turning it on to splash some cold water on her face. The pipes groaned in protest, a familiar sound in their aging building. As she patted her face dry with a threadbare towel, Julia caught sight of the pregnancy test hidden behind the toilet tank. Negative. Again. She bit her lip, fighting back tears. One more dream deferred. Stepping out of the bathroom, Julia found Evan hunched over their small kitchen table, poring over a stack of papers. At 35, Evan's boyish good looks were fading, replaced by worry lines etched deeply into his forehead. His sandy brown hair, once thick and wavy, was thinning at the temples. He looked up as Julia entered, offering a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning, sunshine," he said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "I think I've got it this time. This new project, it's going to change everything for us." Julia's heart sank. She'd heard those words too many times before. "Evan, we talked about this. We can't afford another one of your projects right now." Evan's face fell, his enthusiasm deflating like a punctured balloon. "But Jules, you don't understand. This one's different. I've done the math, run the numbers. It's foolproof." Julia moved to the coffee maker, desperate for caffeine to face the impending argument. "That's what you said about the food truck idea, and the handmade furniture business, and let's not forget the revolutionary dog-walking app." Evan stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Those were learning experiences. This time I've got it all figured out. We just need a small investment to get started." Julia turned to face him, her patience wearing thin. "And where exactly is this small investment coming from? Our non-existent savings? The credit cards that are already maxed out?" The silence that followed was deafening. Evan's shoulders slumped as he sank back into his chair. I thought maybe we could ask your parents for a loan." Julia's grip on her coffee mug tightened, her knuckles turning white. "No, absolutely not. We've been through this, Evan. I'm not asking them for another cent. Not after last time." The memory of their last family dinner hung heavily in the air. Julia's parents, successful business owners themselves, had made their disappointment in Evan painfully clear. The cutting remarks, the sidelong glances, the not-so-subtle suggestions that Julia could do better. It had been humiliating for both of them. Evan ran a hand through his thinning hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Then what do you suggest, Jules? We can barely make rent as it is. The temp agency hasn't called in weeks and the garage isn't giving me enough hours. We need a break, something to change our luck." Julia set her mug down on the counter, harder than she intended. The sound echoed in the small kitchen. "Luck? Is that what we're relying on now? Evan, we need stability, not pipe dreams." She moved to the window, pushing aside the threadbare curtain to look out at the grey Baltimore skyline. The city seemed to mirror their lives, full of potential, yet somehow always falling short of expectations. "I can't keep doing this," Julia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep watching us struggle year after year, always hoping for a miracle that never comes." Evan stood and approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Jules, I promise you, things will get better. We just need to hold on a little longer." Julia turned to face him, tears welling in her eyes. "And then what? We've been holding on for 10 years, Evan. 10 years of scraping by, of broken promises and shattered dreams. I'm tired, I'm so tired." The weight of their shared history hung between them. They'd met in college, both full of ambition and hope for the future. Julia, the aspiring writer, and Evan, the would-be entrepreneur. They'd fallen in love over late-night study sessions and dreams of changing the world, but life had a way of grinding down even the most ardent dreamers. Evan pulled Julia into an embrace, his voice soft against her hair. "I know it's been hard, but we've got each other, right? That's what matters." Julia wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to recapture that feeling of invincibility they'd had in their youth, but the harsh realities of their life in Baltimore, the mounting bills, the dwindling opportunities, the constant stress, had taken their toll. She pulled away from Evan, wiping her eyes. "I need to get ready for work. Mrs. Goldstein needs me to watch her kids today." Evan nodded, his expression a mix of concern and resignation. "Yeah, I should head to the garage. Maybe they'll have some extra hours for me." As Julia moved to get dressed, her eye caught on a small bottle on their dresser. It was a homemade face cream she'd concocted using natural ingredients, a hobby she'd picked up to save money on expensive skincare products. Her friends had raved about it, even offering to buy some from her. A tiny spark of an idea flickered in the back of her mind. What if? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. Now wasn't the time for another wild scheme. They needed real solutions, not more fantasies. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine motions. Julia and Evan moved around each other in their small apartment, the tension from their argument still simmering beneath the surface. As they prepared to leave for their respective jobs, Julia paused at the door. "Evan," she said, her voice soft but firm, "we need to talk, really talk, about our future, about where we're heading. This can't go on." Evan nodded, his expression solemn. "I know. Tonight after dinner," Julia agreed, and they shared a brief tentative kiss before heading out into the bustling streets of Baltimore. As she walked to the bus stop, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something. Whether it was a new beginning or the beginning of the end, she couldn't say. The day dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Julia's mind raced as she cared for Mrs. Goldstein's rambunctious children, her thoughts constantly drifting back to her conversation with Evan. What would happen tonight? What decisions would they make? The uncertainty gnawed at her, a constant companion throughout the day. As evening approached, Julia found herself standing outside their apartment building, hesitating before entering. The weight of the impending conversation felt almost physical, pressing down on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The moment she opened the door, she knew something was wrong. The apartment was dark, silent, no smell of dinner cooking. No sound of Evan puttering around in the kitchen as he usually did. "Evan?" she called out, flicking on the lights. No response. Her heart racing, Julia moved through the small space, checking each room. Empty, empty, empty. Then she saw it. A note on the kitchen table, Evan's messy scrawl unmistakable. "Jules, I couldn't wait. I had to act now or lose the opportunity. I've taken out a loan to fund my new project. I know you'll be angry, but please trust me. This is it. This is the one that's going to change everything for us. I'll be back in a few days. I love you, Evan." Julia sank into a chair, the note crumpling in her trembling hands. The silence of the apartment pressed in around her, suffocating. Evan had done it again. Another reckless decision, another desperate gamble. But this time something felt different. As Julia sat there, alone in the gathering darkness, she felt something shift inside her. The last thread of patience, of hope, of belief in Evan and their shared dreams finally snapped. She stood up slowly, moving to the window to look out at the Baltimore skyline. The city lights twinkled in the distance, 1,000 pinpricks of possibility. For the first time in years, Julia allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life without the constant struggle, without the weight of Evan's failed dreams dragging her down. Her eyes fell on the small bottle of homemade face cream on the dresser. That tiny spark of an idea from this morning flickered to life again, growing stronger. What if, this time, she didn't push the thought away? Instead, she grabbed a notebook and began to write, her pen flying across the page as ideas poured out. By the time she looked up, hours had passed, and the first light of dawn was creeping through the window. Julia stood, stretching her cramped muscles. She looked around the small apartment, seeing it with new eyes. This place that had been a symbol of their shared struggle now felt like a cocoon she was ready to shed. She picked up her phone, hesitating for just a moment before dialing a number she knew by heart. "Mom, it's me. I need your help with something." As Julia began to outline her plan, she felt a surge of energy, of purpose. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. She had no idea where this path would lead, But she knew one thing for certain. Everything was about to change. Little did Julia know as she took her first steps towards a new future that the decisions she made in the coming days would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. The Julia who stood in that small Baltimore apartment, filled with newfound determination, had no inkling of the empire she would build, the hearts she would break, or the karmic retribution that awaited her. As the sun rose over Baltimore, casting long shadows across the city, Julia Reeves stood on the threshold of a new chapter. The struggling, desperate woman of yesterday was fading away, replaced by someone harder, more determined, someone who was ready to do whatever it took to escape the life she'd been trapped in. But as any savvy Baltimore resident knows, the city has a way of teaching harsh lessons to those who think they can outsmart fate. Julia's journey was just beginning, and the path ahead was fraught with more danger, betrayal, and heartbreak than she could possibly imagine. The sound of a car backfiring in the street below startled Julia out of her reverie. She moved to the window, watching as the city came to life around her. Workers hurrying to catch the early bus, street vendors setting up their carts, the never-ending pulse of urban life. For a moment she thought she saw Evan in the crowd, his familiar gait and tousled hair catching her eye. But it was just a stranger, another face in the sea of people. Julia felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of worry, anger, and something else she couldn't quite name. Regret, perhaps, or the first stirrings of a resolve that would soon harden into something unbreakable. She turned away from the window, her gaze falling on the crumpled note Evan had left. In that moment, Julia made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She picked up the note, walked to the small fireplace they never used, and struck a match. As she watched the paper curl and blacken in the flames, Julia whispered to herself, "No more waiting. No more broken promises. It's my turn now." The fire cast flickering shadows across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. In that moment, if anyone had been there to witness it, they would have seen the birth of a woman who would stop at nothing to achieve her goals, a woman who, in her pursuit of success, would leave a trail of broken hearts and shattered lives in her wake. But for now, Julia was alone in the apartment, standing at the crossroads of her life. The choices she would make in the coming days would set her on a collision course with destiny, hurtling towards a future she could never have imagined. As the last embers of Evan's note died away, Julia turned to face the new day, unaware that she had just lit a fuse that would eventually blow her entire world apart. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and in the bustling streets of Baltimore, the wheels of fate began to turn, carrying Julia, Evan, and countless others towards a destiny none of them could foresee. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of Baltimore as Julia Reeves hurried towards the small cafe where she'd arranged to meet her mother. Her heart raced, partly from the brisk walk and partly from the anticipation of what lay ahead. The weight of the business plan she'd hastily crafted the night before seemed to burn in her bag, a tangible representation of her dreams and fears. As she pushed open the door to Charm City Brews, the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee enveloped her. Her mother, Eleanor Kensington, sat primly at a corner table, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and tailored suit a stark contrast to Julia's disheveled appearance. "Julia, darling," Eleanor said, rising to greet her daughter with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, "you look tired. Is everything all right?" Julia slid into the seat across from her mother, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just been a long night." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, concern and judgment warring in her expression. "Is it Evan? Has he gotten you into trouble again?" "No, it's not," Julia began, but was cut off by the arrival of the waitress. "What can I get for you, ladies?" the young woman asked, her name tag reading Zoe. "Just a black coffee for me, please," Julia said. Eleanor ordered a complex latte with precise specifications, then turned back to her daughter as Zoe walked away. "Now what's this all about, Julia? Your call last night was rather cryptic." Julia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Mum, I have a business proposition for you." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up, a mixture of surprise and skepticism crossing her face. "A business proposition? You?" Ignoring the sting of her mother's doubt, Julia pressed on. She pulled out her hastily prepared business plan, spreading the papers across the table. "I've been making my own skincare products for a while now, and they're good. Really good. I think there's a market for natural, locally made cosmetics, and I want to start a company. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying Julia with a new intensity. And where does Evan fit into all this? Julia hesitated, the lies she'd prepared dying on her lips. He doesn't. This is my idea, my project. I'm doing this on my own. A small smile tugged at the corners of Eleanor's mouth. Well, perhaps there's hope for you yet, Julia. Tell me more. As Julia launched into her pitch, she felt a surge of confidence. She outlined her plans for sourcing ingredients, production methods, and target demographics. Eleanor listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that forced Julia to think on her feet. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of Zoe with their drinks. As she set down Eleanor's complex latte, her hand trembled slightly, causing a bit of foam to spill over the edge of the cup. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Zoe exclaimed, quickly grabbing a napkin to clean up the spill. Eleanor waved off her apologies with a dismissive hand. "It's fine, dear, no harm done." As Zoe hurried away, clearly flustered, Julia couldn't help but notice the way her mother's eyes followed the young waitress. There was something calculating in that gaze, an assessment that Julia had seen many times before when her mother was considering a business opportunity. Turning back to Julia, Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Your idea has potential, I'll give you that. But starting a business isn't easy, Julia. It requires dedication, hard work, and a certain ruthlessness. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Julia felt a flicker of anger at her mother's doubt, but she pushed it down. "I am, Mom. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Eleanor nodded slowly, then reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Very well. I want you to meet with this man. His name is Marcus Delacroix. He's a consultant I've worked with before, and he specializes in startup businesses in the beauty industry. If he thinks your idea has legs, I'll consider investing." Julia took the card, her hand trembling slightly. This was it, her first real step towards changing her life. "Thank you, Mum. I won't let you down." As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Julia's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Evan. "Jules, I'm sorry. Project fell through. Coming home tonight. We need to talk." Julia stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Part of her ached for Evan, for the dreams they'd shared and the love they'd built. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, felt only a cold determination. "Everything all right?" Eleanor asked, noticing Julia's distraction. Julia looked up, her jaw set. "Everything's fine. Just Evan letting me know he's coming home." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Julia, listen to me. If you're serious about this business, you can't let Evan drag you down. Sometimes to move forward, we have to leave things, and people, behind." As they stepped out onto the busy Baltimore street, Julia felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Behind her lay the familiar, the struggles, the disappointments, but also the comfort of Evan's love. Ahead lay the unknown, a path that promised success. But at what cost? "I should get going," Julia said, turning to her mother. "I'll set up that meeting with Mr. Delacroix right away." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Good. And Julia, remember what I said. Success requires sacrifice." As Julia watched her mother's sleek car pull away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was setting something in motion that she wouldn't be able to stop. But the thrill of possibility, of finally taking control of her life, was intoxicating. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Evan's message. After a moment's hesitation, she deleted it without responding. Then she dialed the number on Marcus Delacroix's card. "Mr. Delacroix's office." A crisp voice answered. "Hello, this is Julia Reeves. I'd like to schedule a meeting with Mr. Delacroix as soon as possible. It's regarding a new cosmetics business venture." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Julia threw herself into preparing for her meeting with Marcus Delacroix, refining her business plan and creating samples of her products. Evan's return home barely registered in her frenetic state. "Jules, can we talk?" Evan asked one evening, his voice tinged with desperation. "I know I messed up, but I want to make things right." Julia looked up from her laptop, where she'd been researching market trends in natural cosmetics. "Not now, Evan. I'm busy." Evan's face fell, hurt and confusion evident in his eyes. "Busy with what? What's going on, Jules?" For a moment, Julia considered telling him everything. About her meeting with her mother, about Marcus Delacroix, about her plans for the future. But something held her back. Fear, doubt, or perhaps the first stirrings of the ambition that would come to define her. "It's nothing," she said, turning back to her work. "Just a project I'm working on." Evan stood there for a moment longer, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, he turned and left the room, leaving Julia alone with her plans and her conscience. The day of her meeting with Marcus Delacroix dawned bright and clear. Julia stood outside the imposing office building in downtown Baltimore, her heart pounding. This was it, her chance to prove herself, to start building the life she'd always dreamed of. As she rode the elevator to the 30th floor, Julia couldn't help but think of Evan. He'd been so subdued lately, watching her with worried eyes as she worked late into the night on her project. A pang of guilt shot through her, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford distractions now. The elevator doors opened, revealing a sleek, modern office. A receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. "Miss Reeves? Mr. Delacroix will see you now." Julia followed her down a long hallway, her heels clicking on the polished floor. At the end of the hall, a door opened, and Marcus Delacroix stepped out to greet her. He was younger than Julia had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes. His handshake was firm, his smile confident. "Ms. Reeves, welcome," he said, ushering her into his office. "Eleanor has told me a bit about your idea. I'm intrigued." As Julia launched into her pitch, she felt a surge of confidence. This was her moment, and she was ready. She outlined her plans for a line of natural, locally sourced cosmetics, emphasizing the growing market for eco-friendly beauty products. Marcus listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When Julia finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with those piercing eyes. "You've clearly done your homework, Ms. Reeves," he said, "but starting a business isn't just about having a good idea. It's about execution, about being willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. Are you prepared for that?" Julia met his gaze steadily. "I am, Mr. Delacroix. I've spent too long watching opportunities pass me by. I'm ready to take control of my life, to build something of my own." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "Well then, I think we might have something here. But there's someone else I'd like you to meet before we go any further." He pressed a button on his desk, and moments later, the door opened. Julia turned, and her jaw dropped in surprise. It was Zoe, the waitress from the cafe. "Ms. Reeves, I'd like you to meet Zoe Chen, one of our junior market analysts," Marcus said. "She's been doing some research on the natural cosmetics market that I think you'll find interesting." Zoe smiled, recognition flickering in her eyes. "It's nice to meet you officially, Ms. Reeves. I hope you don't mind, but I overheard some of your conversation with your mother at the cafe. It got me thinking about the potential for a locally sourced cosmetics line, so I did some digging." As Zoe presented her findings, Julia's mind raced. The market was even more promising than she'd realized, with a growing demand for transparent, ethically produced beauty products. But there was also stiff competition, with several established brands already vying for market share. "The key," Zoe concluded, "will be differentiation. You'll need a unique angle, something that sets your brand apart." Julia nodded, her mind already spinning with possibilities. "I have some ideas about that," she said, pulling out samples of her homemade products. "These aren't just natural and locally sourced. They're formulated specifically for urban skin, to combat the effects of pollution and stress that city dwellers face every day." Marcus and Zoe exchanged a look. "Urban skin defense," Marcus mused. "That could be very marketable. Zoe, what do you think?" Zoe nodded enthusiastically. With the right branding, that could definitely carve out a niche in the market. As the meeting wrapped up, Julia felt a sense of exhilaration. This was really happening. Her dream was taking shape, becoming more tangible by the minute. "I think we have the beginnings of something promising here, Ms. Reeves," Marcus said as he walked her to the door. "I'll be in touch soon to discuss next steps." As Julia rode the elevator back down to the street, her phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Hey Jules, made your favorite dinner. Thought we could talk tonight? Miss you." Julia stared at the message, a knot forming in her stomach. She thought of Evan waiting at home, of the life they'd built together. Then she thought of the excitement she'd felt in Marcus's office, of the future that was suddenly within her grasp. With a deep breath, she typed out a reply. "Working late. Don't wait up." As she stepped out onto the busy Baltimore street, Julia felt as though she was seeing the world through new eyes. The city that had once felt like a trap now seemed full of possibility. She was on the cusp of something big. She could feel it. But as she hailed a taxi to head back to her makeshift lab, Julia couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was leaving something important behind. The image of Evan, alone in their apartment, waiting for her, flashed through her mind. She pushed the thought away. Success requires sacrifice, she muttered to herself, echoing her mother's words. Little did Julia know, as the taxi wove through the Baltimore traffic, that the sacrifices required would be greater than she could ever have imagined. The path she'd set herself on would lead to triumph and tragedy in equal measure, testing the limits of her ambition and her humanity. As the sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across the streets, Julia Reeves stood on the threshold of a new life. The struggling, desperate woman of just a few days ago was fading away, replaced by someone harder, more determined, someone who was ready to do whatever it took to succeed. But in the gathering darkness, unseen forces were already in motion. The decisions Julia had made, the alliances she'd begun to forge, had set off a chain reaction that would eventually come full circle, bringing her face to face with the consequences of her ambition. For now, though, Julia was flying high on the wings of possibility. As she entered her makeshift lab, ready to work through another night on her formulas, she had no idea of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. A storm that would test her resolve, challenge her morals, and ultimately force her to confront the true cost of success. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and in the heart of Baltimore, a drama was unfolding that would change lives forever. Julia Reeves, once a small-time dreamer, was about to become a force to be reckoned with. But at what price? As she settled in for another long night of work, Julia's phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. "Ms. Reeves, this is Carlos Vasquez, Mr. Delacroix's assistant. He'd like to meet again tomorrow. There's been an interesting development." Julia's heart raced as she read the message. What could this mean? Was this the break she'd been waiting for, or the first sign of trouble on her newly chosen path? With trembling fingers, she typed out a reply. "I'll be there. Same time?" The response came almost immediately. "Yes. And Ms. Reeves, come prepared. Things are about to move very quickly." As Julia stared at her phone, a mix of excitement and apprehension washing over her, she couldn't have known that this message was the harbinger of a whirlwind that would sweep her off her feet and into a world she was ill-prepared to navigate. A world of cutthroat business deals, ethical dilemmas and personal betrayals that would test the very core of who she was and who she wanted to become. The chess pieces were set. The first move had been made, and Julia Reeves was about to be drawn into a game where the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. As she turned back to her work, throwing herself into perfecting her formulas, the city of Baltimore hummed with the energy of lives intertwining, destinies colliding, and a future rushing headlong towards an explosive confrontation. Little did Julia know, as she worked through the night, that every decision she made from this point forward would ripple out, affecting not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. The Julia who entered that makeshift lab was still recognizable as the woman Evan had fallen in love with all those years ago, but the Julia who would emerge in the coming weeks and months would be someone else entirely, someone capable of greatness, yes, but also of terrible, heartbreaking choices. The clock ticked steadily towards midnight, each second bringing Julia closer to a future that would redefine her in ways she could never have anticipated. In the quiet of her lab, surrounded by the fruits of her labor and the promise of a new beginning, Julia Reeves stood on the precipice of a transformation that would shake the very foundations of her world. As the first rays of dawn began to creep over the Baltimore skyline, Julia finally set down her tools, exhausted but exhilarated. She had done it. She had created something truly unique, a formula that she was sure would revolutionize the cosmetics industry. But as she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror, hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, a smear of lotion across her cheek, she couldn't help but wonder at what cost. The thought was fleeting, quickly pushed aside by the excitement of the upcoming meeting. Whatever this interesting development was, Julia was ready, or so she thought. Little did she know, as she finally crawled into bed for a few hours of restless sleep, that the real test was yet to come. The game was about to change, and Julia Reeves was about to learn the true meaning of ambition, sacrifice, and the price of success in a world that takes no prisoners. The stage was set. The players were in motion, And as the sun rose over Baltimore, casting long shadows across the city's skyline, Julia Reeves slept fitfully, unaware that she was about to step into a whirlwind that would test her resolve, challenge her morals, and ultimately reshape her entire world. The shrill ring of her alarm jolted Julia awake. She blinked, disoriented, before the reality of the day ahead came rushing back. The meeting with Marcus Delacroix, the interesting development, her future hanging in the balance. As she hurried through her morning routine, Julia caught sight of Evan's sleeping form on the couch. A pang of guilt shot through her. When had they started sleeping separately? She couldn't remember. The distance between them seemed to grow with each passing day. "Evan," she called softly, shaking his shoulder. "I'm heading out. I might be late tonight." Evan stirred, his eyes clouded with sleep and something else. Worry, disappointment. "Again, Jules? What's going on with you lately?" Julia hesitated, the truth on the tip of her tongue. But the memory of Marcus Delacroix's piercing gaze, of the possibilities that lay ahead, held her back. "It's just work stuff. I'll explain everything soon. I promise." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but Julia pushed the feeling aside. She had bigger things to focus on today. The Delacroix building loomed before her, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. Julia took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and strode through the revolving doors. This time, she bypassed the receptionist, making her way directly to Marcus's office on the 30th floor. As the elevator ascended, Julia's mind raced. What could this interesting development be? Had Marcus found an investor, or had he discovered a fatal flaw in her business plan? The doors slid open, revealing not just Marcus Delacroix, but a room full of people. Julia's steps faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. "Ah, Ms. Reeves," Marcus said, rising to greet her. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Allow me to introduce you to some key players in the cosmetics industry." Julia's head spun as Marcus rattled off names and titles: CEOs, marketing executives, chemists. It seemed like half the beauty industry was crammed into this room. "What's going on?" Julia whispered to Zoe, who had appeared at her elbow. Zoe's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Your urban skin defense concept. It's bigger than we thought. Much bigger." Before Julia could process this, Marcus was calling the room to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today because Ms. Reeves has brought us an opportunity that could revolutionize the cosmetics industry. Her concept of urban skin defense fills a gap in the market that we've all been struggling to address." Julia listened, stunned, as Marcus outlined her idea to the room. The executives nodded, scribbled notes, and whispered to each other. It was surreal. Just days ago, this had been a pipe dream concocted in her tiny apartment. Now, it was being discussed by industry titans. "However," Marcus continued, his tone turning serious, "bringing a product like this to market requires resources that Ms. Reeves, as a startup, simply doesn't have. That's where you all come in." Julia's heart sank. Was this it? Was he about to hand her idea over to these corporate giants? "I propose a joint venture," Marcus said. "Delacroix Consulting will oversee the project. Miss Reeves will retain creative control and a significant stake in the company. The rest of you will provide the capital, manufacturing capabilities, and distribution networks we need to make this a global success." The room erupted in discussion. Julia stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. This was beyond anything she had imagined. It was a chance to see her dream realized on a scale she had never thought possible. But as the executives debated percentages and profit margins, a cold realization began to settle in Julia's stomach. This wasn't just about creating a product anymore. This was big business with big stakes and big risks. "Ms. Reeves," a voice cut through the noise. It was Carlos Vasquez, Marcus's assistant. "Mr. Delacroix would like a word with you in private." Julia followed Carlos to a small adjoining office, her mind reeling. Marcus was already there, his expression unreadable. "Well, Julia," he said, using her first name for the first time, "this is it, the opportunity of a lifetime. But I need to know, are you ready for this?" "Really ready?" Julia took a deep breath. I think so. It's all happening so fast." Marcus's eyes hardened. "Think isn't good enough, Julia. This is a cutthroat industry. If you're not 100% committed, if you're not willing to do whatever it takes to succeed, then walk away now. Because once we start this, there's no going back." Julia thought of Evan. of the life they had built together. She thought of her parents, of their disappointment and doubt. She thought of all the years of struggle, of dreams deferred. Then she thought of the future that lay before her, a future of success, of recognition, of finally proving herself to the world. In that moment, something shifted inside Julia Reeves. The last vestiges of the uncertain, struggling woman she had been fell away, replaced by someone harder, more determined, someone who was ready to seize her chance, no matter the cost. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "Whatever it takes." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "That's what I wanted to hear. Welcome to the big leagues, Julia." As they rejoined the group, Julia felt as though she was seeing the world through new eyes. The executives who had seemed so intimidating before now looked like pieces on a chessboard, pieces she was ready to move. For the rest of the meeting, Julia was a force to be reckoned with. She negotiated terms, defended her vision, and stood her ground against industry veterans. By the time the last contract was signed, Julia Reeves was no longer just a small-time dreamer with a good idea. She was the founder and creative director of Urban Shield Cosmetics, a joint venture backed by some of the biggest names in the industry. As the executives filed out, offering congratulations and business cards, Julia felt a heady mix of exhilaration and terror. She had done it. She had taken the first step towards the life she had always dreamed of. But as she gathered her things, preparing to head home, Julia caught sight of her reflection in the window. For a moment, she hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back at her was poised, confident, successful, everything she had ever wanted to be. So why did she feel like she had just made a deal with the devil? The elevator ride down to the lobby seemed to take an eternity. Julia's mind raced, replaying every moment of the meeting, every decision she had made. It was only when she stepped out onto the busy Baltimore street that the full weight of what had just happened hit her. She had done it. She had secured funding, support, and a platform for her ideas. Urban Shield Cosmetics was no longer just a dream. It was a reality that would change her life forever. As she hailed a taxi, Julia's phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan. "Hey Jules, hope your meeting went well. Made reservations at that Italian place you love for tonight. Thought we could celebrate whatever it is you've been working on. Love you." Julia stared at the message, a lump forming in her throat. Evan, sweet, supportive Evan, who had been by her side through all the struggles, all the failed dreams. Evan, who had no idea that his world was about to be turned upside down. For a moment, Julia's finger hovered over the reply button. She could still turn back. She could go home, tell Evan everything, figure out a way to pursue this opportunity together. But then Marcus's words echoed in her mind. "If you're not willing to do whatever it takes to succeed, then walk away now." With a deep breath, Julia typed out a response. "Sorry, can't make it tonight. Lots of work to do. Don't wait up." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying her towards her makeshift lab rather than home, Julia felt as though she was leaving more than just Evan behind. She was leaving behind the old Julia, the one who had dreamed small and played it safe. The new Julia, the one born in that boardroom, had bigger dreams, and she was ready to do whatever it took to achieve them. Little did Julia know, as the Baltimore skyline receded in the rearview mirror, that the path she had chosen would lead her to heights she had never imagined, and to depths she could never have foreseen. The game had changed, the stakes had been raised, and Julia Reeves was all in. But in the high-stakes world she had just entered, every win comes at a cost. And as Julia was about to learn, sometimes the price of success is higher than anyone is prepared to pay. As the taxi wove through the busy Baltimore streets, Julia's mind raced with possibilities. She had a mountain of work ahead of her, formulas to perfect, branding to develop, a company to build from the ground up. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The taxi pulled up in front of her apartment building, and Julia hesitated for a moment before directing the driver to continue on to her makeshift lab. She couldn't face Evan right now, couldn't bear to see the hope and love in his eyes when she knew she was about to shatter their shared dreams. Hours passed in a blur of calculations, experiments, and frantic note-taking. It was well past midnight when Julia finally emerged from her lab, exhausted but exhilarated. As she walked the quiet streets back to her apartment, she felt as though she was seeing Baltimore through new eyes. The city that had once felt like a trap now seemed full of possibility. But as she approached her building, A familiar figure on the stoop made her heart sink. Evan was sitting there, a bouquet of wilted flowers in his hand, his face a mask of worry and confusion. "Jules," he said, standing as she approached, "where have you been? I've been calling and texting all night." Julia looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in weeks. She saw the love in his eyes, the worry lines etched into his forehead, the way he still looked at her as though she hung the moon. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. "Evan," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "we need to talk." The next hour was the hardest of Julia's life. She told Evan everything about the meeting with her mother, about Marcus Delacroix, about Urban Shield Cosmetics. She watched as the hope in his eyes turned to confusion, then hurt, then a deep, aching betrayal. "So that's it," Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're just leaving? Throwing away everything we've built together?" Julia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to be weak now. "I'm not throwing anything away, Evan. I'm reaching for something more. Something I've always wanted." "And what about what we wanted?" Evan's voice cracked. "What about our dreams, our plans?" "Those were your dreams, Evan," Julia said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Your plans. I went along with them because I loved you, because I wanted to believe, but this is my dream, my chance to be more than just someone's wife, someone's support system." Evan recoiled as though she had slapped him. "Is that all I've been to you, a burden?" "No, Evan, that's not what I—" But Evan was already standing, grabbing his jacket. "I think I need some air. I can't be here right now." As the door slammed behind him, Julia sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. She had known this would be hard, but she hadn't anticipated the hollow ache in her chest, the feeling that she had just torn out a piece of herself. But as she sat there in the silence of their once shared apartment, Julia steeled herself. This was the price of ambition, the cost of reaching for the stars, and she was determined to pay it, no matter how much it hurt. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Julia threw herself into her work, with a fervor that bordered on obsession. She moved out of the apartment she had shared with Evan, setting up a small studio closer to her lab. She worked around the clock, perfecting formulas, attending meetings, making decisions that would shape the future of Urban Shield Cosmetics. Marcus Delacroix became a constant presence in her life, guiding her through the complex world of corporate cosmetics. Julia found herself both drawn to and wary of the older man. His brilliance was undeniable, his business acumen unmatched, but there was a coldness to him, a calculating edge that sometimes sent a shiver down Julia's spine. "Remember, Julia," he would say, his blue eyes boring into hers, "in this business there's no room for sentimentality. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to stay on top." And Julia was learning. She was learning to be harder, sharper, more focused. She was learning to see opportunities where others saw obstacles, to turn setbacks into stepping stones. But with each passing day, with each decision that pushed her further from the person she had been, Julia felt a gnawing emptiness growing inside her. She threw herself into her work with even greater intensity, as though she could fill the void with success and acclaim. It was at an industry gala, 6 months after that fateful meeting in Marcus's office, that Julia's new world collided spectacularly with her old one. She was working the room, charming investors and dazzling critics with her vision for Urban Shield, when a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. "Julia?" She turned, her heart skipping a beat. There, looking dashing in a tailored suit, was Evan. But he wasn't alone. On his arm was a stunning woman Julia didn't recognize, her smile warm and genuine as she looked up at Evan. "Evan," Julia said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I didn't expect to see you here." Evan's expression was unreadable, a mix of emotions flickering across his face. "I could say the same. Julia, this is Sophia. Sophia, this is Julia, an old friend." The word friend hit Julia like a physical blow. Was that all she was now? An old friend? Sophia extended her hand, her smile never wavering. "It's lovely to meet you, Julia. I've heard so much about your company. Urban Shield, right? Your anti-pollution serum is a game changer." Julia shook Sophia's hand automatically, her mind reeling. "Thank you, it's nice to meet you too." An awkward silence fell over the group. Julia searched Evan's face, looking for some sign of the man she had loved, the man she had left behind. but his eyes were guarded, his posture stiff. "Well," Evan said finally, "we should circulate. It was good to see you, Julia." As they walked away, Julia felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She had known intellectually that Evan would move on, that he deserved to be happy, but seeing him here, successful and content without her, sent a jolt of something, regret, jealousy, through her. "Julia," Marcus's voice cut through her thoughts. He was at her elbow, a champagne flute in his hand. "Everything all right?" Julia plastered on a smile, pushing down the turmoil of emotions. "Of course, just catching up with an old friend." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, following her gaze to where Evan and Sophia were chatting with a group of executives. "Ah, I see. Well, don't let it distract you. We have bigger fish to fry tonight." As Marcus led her towards a group of potential investors, Julia felt something harden inside her. Yes, she had bigger fish to fry. She had a company to run, an empire to build. She couldn't afford to be distracted by ghosts from her past. But as the night wore on, as she charmed and negotiated and solidified deals that would catapult Urban Shield to new heights, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost something irreplaceable, that in her pursuit of success, she had left behind a part of herself that she might never get back. Little did Julia know, as she raised a toast to Urban Shield's bright future, that the choices she had made, the bridges she had burned, were about to come back to haunt her in ways she could never have imagined. The game was far from over, and the true cost of her ambition was yet to be paid. As the gala wound down, Julia found herself on the balcony, seeking a moment of quiet amidst the chaos of the evening. The Baltimore skyline stretched out before her, a glittering tapestry of lights and possibilities. She had done it. She had made it to the top. So why did she feel so empty? Quite a view, isn't it? Julia turned to find Zoe standing beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She offered one to Julia with a sympathetic smile. "Thanks," Julia said, taking the glass. "I didn't realize you were here tonight." Zoe leaned against the balcony railing, her eyes scanning the cityscape. "I wouldn't miss it. Urban Shield's launch is the talk of the industry. You should be proud, Julia. You've accomplished something incredible." Julia took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles dance on her tongue. "I am proud," she said, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Zoe studied her for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "But," Julia sighed, the weight of the evening settling on her shoulders, "but I can't help feeling like I've lost something along the way. Seeing Evan tonight, and it just brought everything back." Zoe nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "The price of success is high, Julia. We all pay it in different ways." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the sounds of the party drifting out from behind them. Finally, Zoe spoke again, her voice low and urgent. "Julia, there's something you should know. I've been hearing whispers, rumors in the industry." Julia turned to face her, suddenly alert. "What kind of rumors?" Zoe glanced over her shoulder, ensuring they were alone. "There's talk of a new player entering the market, someone with deep pockets and a grudge against Urban Shield." Julia's mind raced. A new competitor wasn't unusual in this industry, but one with a specific grudge? "Do you know who it is?" Zoe shook her head. "No names yet, but whatever it is, it's big enough to have Marcus worried." As if summoned by his name, Marcus Delacroix appeared in the doorway. His eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Julia and Zoe in close conversation. "Ladies," he said smoothly, approaching them, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Julia straightened, her business mask slipping back into place. "Not at all, Marcus. Zoe was just filling me in on some industry gossip." Marcus's gaze flicked between them, assessing. "I see. Well, Julia, if you're done stargazing, there are some people I'd like you to meet. Potential investors for our Asian expansion." Julia nodded, draining the last of her champagne. As she moved to follow Marcus, Zoe caught her arm. "Be careful, Julia," she whispered, "and watch your back." The warning sent a chill down Julia's spine, but she pushed it aside. She had a company to run, deals to make. She couldn't afford to be distracted by vague threats and old regrets. As she re-entered the party, Julia Reeves was once again the confident, ambitious CEO of Urban Shield Cosmetics. But beneath the polished exterior, doubts began to creep in. What had she really sacrificed in her rise to the top? And what new challenges lay ahead? Little did she know, as she charmed investors and sealed deals, that the true test of her ambition was yet to come. The game was changing, the stakes rising, And Julia was about to learn that in the world she had entered, even the smallest decision could have far-reaching consequences. The weeks following the gala were a whirlwind of activity. Urban Shield's popularity soared, with their products flying off shelves faster than they could stock them. Julia found herself at the center of a media storm, hailed as a visionary entrepreneur and a champion of urban skincare. But success, Julia was learning, was a double-edged sword. With increased visibility came increased scrutiny. Every decision she made was analyzed, every statement passed for hidden meanings. The pressure was immense, and Julia found herself working longer hours, pushing herself and her team to the brink. It was during one of these late nights at the office that Julia received a call that would change everything. "Ms. Reeves." The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, tense. "This is Detective Sarah Martinez from the Baltimore PD. We need you to come down to the station. There's been an incident at one of your manufacturing plants." Julia's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I think it's best if we discuss this in person, Ms. Reeves. How soon can you get here?" As Julia rushed out of the office, her mind racing with possibilities, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the carefully constructed world she had built was about to come crashing down around her. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Julia sat across from Detective Martinez, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "Ms. Reeves," Martinez began, her tone grave, "we've uncovered evidence of serious safety violations at your Baltimore manufacturing plant. Workers exposed to dangerous chemicals, corners cut on quality control. And now we have reports of people falling ill after using Urban Shield products." Julia felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. That's impossible. We have strict safety protocols, rigorous testing procedures." Martinez slid a file across the table. "These documents suggest otherwise. Ms. Reeves, did you knowingly allow unsafe practices in order to meet production demands?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Julia's mind raced. She had pushed for increased production, yes, had demanded faster turnaround times, but she had never, would never knowingly put people at risk. Had she? As the interrogation dragged on, Julia felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. By the time she left the station in the early hours of the morning, her head was spinning. This wasn't just a PR crisis. This was a potential catastrophe. Her phone buzzed incessantly as she climbed into her car, missed calls from Marcus, from her PR team, from journalists seeking comment. But one message caught her eye. From an unknown number. "The higher you climb, the harder you fall. This is just the beginning." Julia stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. Was this connected to the rumors Zoe had mentioned? Was someone deliberately targeting Urban Shield? As she drove through the quiet streets of Baltimore, the city she had once seen as full of possibility now felt oppressive, threatening. Julia Reeves, the woman who had clawed her way to the top through sheer determination and ambition, suddenly felt very small, very vulnerable. She pulled over, her hands shaking too badly to drive. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Julia found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She cried, deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. What had she become? In her relentless pursuit of success, had she lost sight of what truly mattered? Had she sacrificed her integrity, her relationships, her very self on the altar of ambition? As the sun rose over Baltimore, casting long shadows across the city, Julia Reeves sat in her car, facing the hardest question of all. Was it worth it? Little did she know, as she wiped away her tears and steeled herself to face the storm ahead, that this was just the beginning. The true test of her character, of everything she had built and everything she had sacrificed, was yet to come. The game had changed. The stakes had never been higher, and Julia Reeves was about to learn that in the world she had entered, redemption often comes at a price few are willing to pay. The sun had barely risen over Baltimore's skyline when Julia Reeves strode into the Urban Shield headquarters, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor. The lobby, once a testament to her meteoric rise, now felt like a gilded cage. Employees scurried out of her path, their whispers trailing in her wake. "Did you hear? The FDA's launching a full investigation. I heard they're considering a total product recall. What if we lose our jobs?" Julia steeled herself against the murmurs, her face an impassive mask. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished doors. The woman staring back at her was a far cry from the wide-eyed dreamer who had started this journey. Designer suit, impeccable makeup, not a hair out of place. She looked every inch the successful CEO. But the shadows under her eyes told a different story. The doors opened to reveal Marcus Delacroix, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. "Julia, thank God. We need to talk. Now." She followed him into the conference room, where a team of lawyers and PR specialists were already assembled. The next few hours passed in a blur of strategy sessions, damage control plans, and carefully worded press releases. By the time Julia emerged, the sun was setting over Baltimore, casting an orange glow over the city she once saw as her kingdom. As she sank into the plush leather seat of her car, Julia's phone buzzed. A text from Evan. "Jules, I saw the news. Are you okay? If you need anything, I'm here." Julia stared at the message, a lump forming in her throat. Even after everything, after she had pushed him away and chosen her ambition over their love, Evan still cared. The realization hit her like a physical blow, forcing the air from her lungs. She was about to reply when another message came through, this one from Carlos, her young and ambitious VP of marketing. "Crisis meeting at the Harbor Club in 30. We have a plan." Julia hesitated, her thumb hovering over Evan's message. Then, with a deep breath, she switched off her phone and directed her driver to the Harbor Club. The exclusive restaurant was nearly empty when Julia arrived, save for a small group in the private dining room. Carlos greeted her with a kiss on each cheek, his charm turned up to full wattage. "Julia, darling, you look exhausted. Let's get some champagne in you, shall we?" He guided her to a seat, his hand lingering on the small of her back. As the waiter poured Dom Perignon into delicate flutes, Carlos leaned in close. "Now, about this little hiccup. I've been talking to some friends in the media. For the right price, we can make this go away, bury it under a bigger story." Julia sipped her champagne, considering. A year ago, she would have balked at the idea of manipulating the media. Now it barely raised an eyebrow. "And the FDA investigation?" Carlos's smile widened, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Leave that to me. I have connections that can expedite things." As the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Julia found herself drawn into Carlos's web of charm and promises. He painted a picture of Urban Shield, rising from this crisis stronger than ever, with Julia at the helm, untouchable and revered. It was well past midnight when they stumbled out of the restaurant, Julia's head spinning from more than just the champagne. Carlos pulled her close, his breath hot against her ear. "Come back to my place. We can strategize further." For a moment, Julia hesitated. Evan's face flashed in her mind, his kind eyes and gentle smile a stark contrast to Carlos's sharp ambition. But then she thought of the empire she had built, of all she had sacrificed to get here. She couldn't lose it all now. "Your place," she agreed, her voice husky with desire and determination. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of damage control, clandestine meetings and rising profits. True to his word, Carlos worked his magic. The FDA investigation quietly disappeared, replaced by glowing editorials about Urban Shield's commitment to innovation and safety. Sales soared as consumers, drawn in by the controversy and slick marketing, clamored for Urban Shield products. Julia threw herself into work with renewed vigor, pushing herself and her team to new heights. She expanded into international markets, launched new product lines, and became a fixture on the speaking circuit, hailed as a visionary entrepreneur. But with each new success, each accolade, Julia felt a piece of herself slipping away. The woman who had once dreamed of making a difference, of creating products that truly helped people, was fading, replaced by someone harder, colder, focused solely on the bottom line. Her relationship with Carlos evolved from a strategic alliance to a passionate affair. He was everything Evan wasn't: ambitious, ruthless, unencumbered by moral qualms. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with in the business world. It was at the Urban Shield 5th Anniversary Gala that everything came to a head. The event was the talk of Baltimore, with the city's elite clamoring for invitations. Julia stood at the center of it all, resplendent in a custom-designed gown, Carlos by her side. As she raised a toast to Urban Shield's continued success, Julia caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Evan. He was standing near the back of the room, looking uncomfortable in his rented tux. Their eyes met across the sea of glittering guests, and for a moment the world fell away. Julia excused herself, making her way through the crowd. "Evan, what are you doing here?" He shifted awkwardly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hey, Jules. I got an invitation. Figured I should come. See how you're doing." Julia's heart clenched. She had sent that invitation weeks ago, in a moment of nostalgia or weakness. She hadn't actually expected him to come. "I'm doing well," she said, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. "The company's thriving. We just expanded into Europe." Evan nodded, his eyes searching her face. "And you? Are you happy, Jules?" The question caught her off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? When was the last time she had even considered it? Before she could answer, Carlos appeared at her side, his arms snaking possessively around her waist. "Julia, darling, the Chinese investors are asking for you." "Oh, hello, you must be—" "Edwin, was it?" "Evan," Julia corrected automatically, watching as Evan's face fell. "Right, of course. Well, Evan, so good of you to come, but if you'll excuse us, duty calls." Carlos steered Julia away, leaving Evan standing alone in the crowd. As they made their rounds, schmoozing with investors and industry bigwigs, Julia couldn't shake the image of Evan's hurt expression. It haunted her, a ghost of the life she had left behind. Later that night, as she and Carlos stumbled into her penthouse apartment, drunk on champagne and success, Julia made a decision. She couldn't keep straddling two worlds. It was time to cut the final tie to her old life. The next morning, nursing a pounding headache, Julia called Evan. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "Can you meet me at the apartment? Our old apartment?" An hour later, she stood in the small living room where they had once shared their dreams. Evan arrived, hope and wariness warring in his eyes. "Jules? What's going on?" Julia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Evan, I think it's time we made this official. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Evan staggered back as if physically struck. "Jules, no, please. We can work this out. I know things have been difficult, but—" "There's no working it out, Evan," Julia interrupted, her voice cold. "I've moved on. I have a new life, a successful company. I can't keep holding on to the past." Tears welled in Evan's eyes, and Julia felt her resolve waver. But then she thought of Carlos, of Urban Shield, of all she had achieved. She couldn't turn back now. "I'm sorry, Evan, but this is how it has to be. My lawyer will be in touch about the details." As she turned to leave, Evan called out, his voice breaking. "Jules, wait, is this really what you want? Are you truly happy?" Julia paused at the door, her hand on the knob. For a moment, she considered telling him the truth, about the loneliness that gnawed at her in the dead of night, about the guilt that threatened to consume her, about the emptiness that all her success couldn't fill. But instead, she squared her shoulders and said, without turning back, "Goodbye, Evan." The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through her very soul. As Julia walked away from the apartment, away from Evan, away from the last vestige of her old self, she felt something inside her harden and crystallize. Julia Reeves, the small-town girl with big dreams, was gone. In her place stood Julia Reeves, CEO of Urban Shield Cosmetics, a woman who had clawed her way to the top and would do anything to stay there. The next few years saw Urban Shield's influence grow exponentially. Julia became a regular on business magazine covers, hailed as a pioneer in the industry. Her relationship with Carlos blossomed into a power couple status, their every move scrutinized by the media. But as Urban Shield's empire expanded, so did the whispers. Rumors of unethical practices, of corners cut and safety regulations ignored. Julia dismissed them as jealousy, as attempts by competitors to undermine her success. It was at the launch party for Urban Shield's new global headquarters that everything changed. Julia stood on the stage, basking in the applause after her speech, Carlos by her side. As camera flashes popped and champagne corks flew, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. "Julia Reeves!" a voice rang out, silencing the crowd. "You're under arrest for fraud, endangering public safety, and corporate espionage." Julia froze, her champagne flute slipping from her fingers and shattering on the stage. As FBI agents pushed through the stunned crowd, she turned to Carlos, expecting to see shock mirroring her own. Instead, she saw a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Carlos?" she whispered, reaching for him, but he stepped back, smoothly distancing himself. "I'm sorry, Julia," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "But it's every man for himself in this game. I'm sure you understand." As the agents reached the stage and began reading her rights, Julia's world imploded. She watched in stunned disbelief as Carlos slipped away, already on his phone, no doubt calling his lawyer. In that moment, as flashbulbs popped and murmurs rippled through the crowd, Julia Reeves realized the true cost of her ambition. She had sacrificed everything, her integrity, her relationships, her very soul, for an empire built on lies and betrayal. As the agents led her away, Julia caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirrored walls of the lobby. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, successful, beautiful, and utterly alone. The doors of the Urban Shield headquarters closed behind her, symbolically shutting the door on the life she had built. As the police car pulled away, carrying her towards an uncertain future, Julia Reeves finally understood the truth of the old adage. Be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. But even as the sirens wailed and the city lights blurred outside the car window, a small part of Julia, the part that still remembered the dreamer she once was, whispered a question that would haunt her in the days to come. Is it too late for redemption? Little did Julia know, as the police car wound its way through the Baltimore streets, that her arrest was just the beginning. The empire she had built was about to come crashing down around her, and the true test of her character was yet to come. In the holding cell of the Baltimore Police Department, Julia sat with her head in her hands, her designer dress now wrinkled and stained. The events of the night played on a loop in her mind. The party, the arrest, Carlos's betrayal. How had it all gone so wrong? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the cell door opening. She looked up, expecting to see her lawyer or perhaps a detective. Instead, she found herself face to face with the last person she expected. Evan. "Jules," he said softly, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else. Disappointment? Julia stood, smoothing her dress in a futile attempt to regain some dignity. "Evan? What are you doing here?" He stepped into the cell, the door clanging shut behind him. "I saw the news. I had to see if you were okay." A bitter laugh escaped Julia's lips. "Okay, I've just lost everything, Evan. My company, my reputation, my freedom. How could I possibly be okay?" Evan moved closer, his familiar scent, a mix of soap and coffee, bringing back a flood of memories. "What happened, Jules? This isn't you. The Julia I knew would never—" "The Julia you knew is gone," she snapped, turning away from him. "She died a long time ago, crushed under the weight of ambition and greed." A heavy silence fell between them. When Evan spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I don't believe that. I can't believe that. The Jules I fell in love with is still in there somewhere." Julia whirled to face him, anger and pain warring in her chest. "Why are you really here, Evan? To gloat? To say I told you so?" Evan shook his head, taking a step closer. "I'm here because despite everything, I still care about you, Jules. And I think you need someone in your corner right now." His words, so sincere and heartfelt, broke something inside Julia. The carefully constructed wall she had built around her heart began to crumble. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "I've made such a mess of everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. Evan closed the distance between them, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "It's not too late, Jules. It's never too late to make things right." As Julia cried in Evan's arms, the enormity of her actions over the past few years crashed over her. The people she had hurt, the ethical lines she had crossed, the person she had become. It all seemed so clear now, stripped of the glitter and glamour of success. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted, her voice muffled against Evan's shoulder. Evan pulled back slightly, his hands on her shoulders. "You start by telling the truth, Jules. All of it, no matter how hard it is." Julia nodded, wiping her tears. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of something she had thought long lost. Hope. But before she could say anything more, the cell door opened again. This time it was her lawyer, looking grim. "Ms. Reeves, we need to talk. Alone," he added, eyeing Evan suspiciously. Evan squeezed Julia's hand one last time before stepping away. "Remember what I said, Jules. It's not too late." As Evan left and her lawyer began outlining the charges against her, Julia felt as though she was standing at a crossroads. On one path lay the familiar, deny everything, fight the charges, try to salvage what she could of her empire. On the other, the unknown, telling the truth, facing the consequences, trying to make amends for the damage she had done. The choice she made in that moment would define not just her future, but the future of everyone whose lives she had touched, for better or worse, over the past few years. As Julia listened to her lawyer detail the evidence against her, a realization began to dawn. The anonymous tip that had led to her arrest, the perfectly timed evidence, Carlos's smooth exit, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. She had been set up. But by whom? And why? As Julia's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle, she understood that her arrest was just the tip of the iceberg. There was a bigger game at play, one that she had been blind to in her relentless pursuit of success. Her lawyer's voice faded into the background as a plan began to form in Julia's mind. She had built an empire from nothing once before. She could do it again, but this time, she would do it differently. This time, she would do it right. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the small window of her cell, Julia Reeves made a decision that would change everything. She would fight, not just for her freedom, but for redemption. She would uncover the truth behind her downfall, no matter where it led or who it implicated. And maybe, just maybe, in the process, she would find her way back to the woman she used to be, the woman Evan still believed in. Little did Julia know, as she steeled herself for the battle ahead, that her journey was far from over. The game had changed, the players had shifted, and the stakes had never been higher. The sun rose over Baltimore, casting long shadows across the city Julia had once considered her kingdom. As she sat in her cell, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her, Julia realized that this was more than just a personal crisis. It was a turning point, not just for her, but for Urban Shield and everyone connected to it. Her lawyer's voice cut through her thoughts. "Ms. Reeves, are you listening? This is serious. The charges against you could mean decades in prison." Julia straightened, a newfound resolve settling over her. "I hear you, but before we go any further, I need you to do something for me." The lawyer leaned in, his eyebrows raised. "What is it?" "I need you to get a message to Zoe Chen. Tell her the storm has broken, and I need her help to weather it." Her lawyer looked confused but nodded. "I'll see what I can do, but Ms. Reeves, we need to focus on your defense. The prosecution has a strong case." Julia shook her head. No more defense, no more hiding. It's time for the truth to come out. All of it." The lawyer's eyes widened. "Ms. Reeves, I strongly advise against—" "Thank you for your concern," Julia interrupted, her voice firm. "But I've made my decision. Set up a press conference. I have a statement to make." As her lawyer left, muttering about client confidentiality and legal strategies, Julia closed her eyes, mentally preparing herself for what was to come. She thought of Evan, of his unwavering belief in her. She thought of her parents, of the disappointment in their eyes when they had learned of her arrest. She thought of the employees at Urban Shield, their livelihoods now hanging in the balance because of her actions. It was time to make things right. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of legal meetings, hurried phone calls, and sleepless nights. When Julia finally stood before the press, the flashing cameras and shouted questions, a far cry from the adoring media attention she had once enjoyed, she felt a strange sense of calm. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "I stand before you today not as the CEO of Urban Shield, but as Julia Reeves, a woman who lost her way." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. "For years I have built my success on a foundation of lies, shortcuts, and betrayals. I convinced myself that the end justified the means, that as long as Urban Shield prospered, nothing else mattered. I was wrong." Julia took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. "Today, I am here to tell the truth, about the safety violations at our plants, about the manipulated clinical trials, about the bribes and the cover-ups. But more than that, I'm here to take responsibility for my actions and to face the consequences, whatever they may be." The room erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing frantically. But Julia wasn't finished. "However, my confession today goes beyond my own misdeeds. In the course of building Urban Shield, I have uncovered evidence of widespread corruption in the cosmetics industry. Price-fixing, dangerous product formulations, environmental violations, the list goes on, and I have names, dates, and documents to back it all up." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia could practically see the shockwaves rippling through the room, through the industry, through the entire city of Baltimore. "I will be turning over all of this information to the authorities. I know this won't absolve me of my crimes, but I hope it will be a step towards making things right. To everyone I've hurt, to everyone I've betrayed, I am truly sorry. I can't undo the past, but I can try to shape a better future." As Julia stepped away from the podium, ignoring the frenzied shouts of the reporters, she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Evan stood at the back of the room, a small smile on his face. He gave her a nod, and in that moment, Julia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The road ahead would be hard. There would be trials, both literal and figurative. The empire she had built would crumble, but for the first time in years, Julia Reeves felt truly free. As she was led away by her lawyers, Julia's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Zoe. "I got your message. The storm's just beginning. Be ready." Julia smiled grimly. She had taken the first step towards redemption, but she knew the journey was far from over. The game had changed once again, and this time Julia was determined to play it on her own terms. Little did she know, as she walked out of the press conference into an uncertain future, that her actions had set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of not just the cosmetics industry, but the entire corporate world. The Julia Reeves who emerged from this crucible would be a force to be reckoned with, not for her ambition or her ruthlessness, but for her unwavering commitment to the truth. The stage was set for the next act in the drama of Julia Reeves's life, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. The Baltimore skyline glittered in the fading twilight as Julia Reeves stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office. From this vantage point, the city seemed small, manageable, a playground for the ambitious and the ruthless, and Julia Reeves was nothing if not ambitious. She swirled the amber liquid in her crystal tumbler, savoring the burn of expensive scotch as she reflected on her journey. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when she'd walked away from Evan and their shared dreams. 5 years of relentless climbing, of strategic alliances and calculated risks. Now, at 37, Julia stood at the pinnacle of success, her name synonymous with innovation and power in the cosmetics industry. Urban Shield had grown from a small startup to a global empire, its products adorning vanity tables from Baltimore to Beijing. Julia's face graced magazine covers, her words dissected by business analysts and aspiring entrepreneurs alike. She had become the very embodiment of the American dream, a self-made woman who had clawed her way to the top through sheer determination and brilliance. But success, Julia had learned, was a lonely mistress. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Ms. Reeves." Her assistant's voice was tentative. "Mr. Vasquez is here to see you." Julia didn't turn from the window. "Send him in, Melissa." The door opened, and Carlos Vasquez strode in, his presence immediately filling the room. At 32, he was the youngest VP in Urban Shield's history, a position he'd achieved through a combination of charm, ruthless ambition, and an uncanny ability to anticipate market trends. "Julia, darling," Carlos purred, crossing the room to stand beside her. "Admiring your kingdom." She turned to face him, taking in his impeccable suit, his perfectly styled hair, the predatory gleam in his eyes that both thrilled and unsettled her. "Our kingdom, Carlos. Or have you forgotten our partnership so soon?" He laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed at odds with the calculating look in his eyes. "How could I forget? We make quite the team, you and I." Julia allowed herself a small smile. Yes, they did make quite the team. Carlos had been instrumental in Urban Shield's explosive growth over the past 2 years. His marketing strategies were nothing short of brilliant, and his network of contacts had opened doors Julia hadn't even known existed. But lately, a nagging doubt had begun to creep into her mind. There was something about Carlos, a hunger, a ruthlessness that sometimes made her wonder if she had created a monster she could no longer control. "The board meeting went well, I trust?" Julia asked, moving to her desk and settling into her chair. Carlos sprawled elegantly in the chair opposite her, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "Better than well. They've approved the Asian expansion. By this time next year, Urban Shield will be the dominant force in the Chinese market." Julia nodded, a surge of excitement coursing through her. This was what she had worked for, what she had sacrificed everything for. "Excellent work, Carlos. I knew I could count on you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's more. I've been in talks with Glamour Glow. They're struggling, ripe for a takeover. With their distribution network and our products, we could corner the European market within 6 months. Julia's eyes widened. Glamour Glow was one of their oldest competitors, a venerable old company that had been struggling to keep up with the rapid changes in the industry. Acquiring them would indeed be a coup, but something in Carlos's tone made her hesitate. A takeover? Carlos, that's not our style. We've always grown organically, through innovation and market strategy. Carlos waved a dismissive hand. Times change, Julia. We need to adapt if we want to stay on top. Trust me, this is the right move. Trust me. How many times had she heard those words over the past 2 years? And how many times had Carlos's instincts proven right? But before Julia could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart skip a beat. It was a message from an unknown number, but the content made her blood run cold. Jules, I need your help. It's about Urban Shield. Meet me at our old spot. Evan. After 5 years of silence, why was he reaching out now? And what did he mean about Urban Shield? Julia, is everything all right? Carlos's voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up, forcing a smile. Yes, of course. Just a minor issue with production. Nothing to worry about. Carlos studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. Then he stood, smoothing his jacket. Well, I'll leave you to it. Think about Glamour Glow. This could be our biggest move yet. As the door closed behind him, Julia slumped in her chair, her mind racing. She hadn't thought about Evan in years, or at least that's what she told herself, but the truth was, he had never truly left her thoughts. In quiet moments, when the weight of her success felt more like a burden than a triumph, she found herself wondering what life might have been like if she had chosen differently. And now, out of the blue, this cryptic message. Julia's finger hovered over the reply button. Should she ignore it? Pretend she had never seen it? That would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But something, curiosity, nostalgia, or perhaps a deeper, unacknowledged longing, made her type out a response. Where and when? The reply came almost instantly. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the bench by the harbor where we used to watch the sunset. Julia closed her eyes, memories washing over her. That bench had been their special place, where they had shared dreams and made plans for a future that now seemed like a distant fairy tale. She knew she shouldn't go. Whatever Evan wanted, it could only complicate her carefully constructed life. But even as she thought this, Julia knew she would be there. Some ties, it seemed, could never truly be severed. The next evening, as the sun dipped low over the Baltimore harbor, Julia found herself walking towards the old weathered bench where she had spent so many evenings with Evan. Her heels clicked against the wooden boardwalk, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet evening air. She spotted him from a distance. His tall frame, slightly more filled out than she remembered, hunched over as he gazed out at the water. For a moment, Julia hesitated. There was still time to turn back, to pretend this moment had never happened. But then Evan turned, his eyes meeting hers, and Julia felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. 5 years melted away in an instant, and she was once again the young, hopeful woman who had believed in love and simple dreams. Jules, Evan said softly as she approached. You came. Julia settled onto the bench beside him, careful to maintain a distance between them. You said it was important. Something about Urban Shield? Evan nodded, his expression grave. Jules, there's no easy way to say this. Urban Shield is in trouble. Big trouble. Julia felt a flicker of annoyance. Was this why he had called her here? To criticize her company? Urban Shield is doing better than ever. We're expanding into Asia, looking at acquisitions in Europe. Whatever you've heard... It's not what I've heard, Jules, Evan interrupted. It's what I know. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. I've been working as a consultant for a pharmaceutical watchdog group. We've been investigating several cosmetics companies, including Urban Shield. Julia's heart began to race. Investigating? For what? Evan's eyes were sad as he met her gaze. Safety violations, Jules. Dangerous shortcuts in production. Clinical trials manipulated to hide side effects. And that's just the beginning. He handed her the folder. Julia's hands shook as she opened it, her eyes scanning the documents inside. Test results, internal memos, financial records, all painting a damning picture of the company she had built. This can't be right, she whispered. But even as the words left her mouth, Julia knew they were true. She had always prided herself on knowing every aspect of her business, but in recent years, as Urban Shield had grown exponentially, she had delegated more and more responsibility to people like Carlos. Carlos. A cold dread settled in Julia's stomach as pieces began to fall into place. His aggressive expansion strategies, his insistence on cutting costs wherever possible, his network of shady contacts. How much had she overlooked in her relentless pursuit of success? Jules, Evan's voice was gentle. I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is clear. Urban Shield has been putting profits over people's safety. And as the CEO, you're going to be held responsible. Julia stood abruptly, her mind reeling. I need to go. I need to fix this. Evan caught her arm. Jules, wait. This goes deeper than you know. There are powerful people involved, people who won't hesitate to throw you under the bus to save themselves. She pulled away, her voice cold. I appreciate the warning, Evan, but I can handle this. I've worked too hard to let it all fall apart now. As Julia strode away, her heels echoing on the boardwalk, she didn't see the look of concern and sadness that crossed Evan's face, nor did she see the shadowy figure that emerged from behind a nearby building, phone in hand, watching her departure with keen interest. The next few weeks passed in a blur of frantic activity. Julia threw herself into damage control, ordering internal audits, reviewing years of records, and holding marathon meetings with her executive team. But the more she dug, the worse things looked. Carlos, unsurprisingly, had disappeared. His resignation letter, delivered by courier, cited personal reasons for his abrupt departure. But Julia knew the truth. He had seen the writing on the wall and had jumped ship, leaving her to deal with the fallout. As she sat in her office late one night, surrounded by stacks of damning reports, Julia felt the full weight of her choices crashing down upon her. She had wanted success at any cost, and now the bill had come due. A soft knock at the door roused her from her dark thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Melissa with another stack of files. But it was Zoe who entered, her face grave. Julia, we need to talk. Julia gestured to the chair across from her desk, too exhausted to even pretend at formality. What is it, Zoe? More bad news? Zoe sat, her posture tense. I'm afraid so. The FDA is planning a surprise inspection of our main production facility. Tomorrow. Julia felt the blood drain from her face. Tomorrow. But we're not ready. The changes we've implemented, the new safety protocols, they're not fully in place yet. Zoe nodded grimly. I know, and that's not all. I've heard rumors that several major news outlets are preparing exposés on Urban Shield. They have insider information, Julia. Detailed accounts of our practices. Carlos, Julia spat the name like a curse. He must be behind this. He's trying to save himself by bringing us down. Probably, Zoe agreed. But that doesn't change the fact that we're in serious trouble. Julia, I don't see a way out of this. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Julia stared out the window at the Baltimore skyline, the city lights blurring as tears filled her eyes. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, it was all crumbling around her. There's always a way out, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We just haven't found it yet. Zoe leaned forward, her expression softening. Julia, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but maybe it's time to consider stepping down. If you distance yourself from the company now before the scandal breaks, you might be able to salvage something. Julia whirled to face her, anger flashing in her eyes. Step down? Abandon ship like Carlos? No. I built this company from nothing. I'm not going to let it destroy me. Then what are you going to do? Zoe asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Julia was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. Then, slowly, a plan began to form. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but it was the only option she could see. We're going to get ahead of this, she said, her voice gaining strength. Call a press conference for tomorrow morning. Before the FDA inspection, before the news stories break. We're going to tell the truth. Zoe's eyes widened in shock. The truth, Julia, that could mean prison time, lawsuits, the end of Urban Shield. Julia finished for her. I know, but it's the only way. We come clean, take responsibility, and hope that our honesty counts for something. As Zoe left to make the arrangements, Julia sank back into her chair, the enormity of what she was about to do washing over her. She thought of Evan, of the concern in his eyes when he had shown her those documents. She thought of her parents, of the pride on their faces when Urban Shield had first taken off. She thought of all the employees whose livelihoods depended on her decision. With a heavy heart, Julia began to draft her statement. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the Baltimore horizon, she finally set down her pen, exhausted but resolute. A few hours later, Julia stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust towards her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I stand before you today, not as the CEO of Urban Shield, but as Julia Reeves, a woman who lost her way." As she continued, laying bare the sins of her company and accepting full responsibility, Julia felt a strange sense of liberation. The truth, it seemed, really could set you free. When she finished, the room erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing frantically, but Julia's eyes sought out only one face in the crowd. Evan stood at the back of the room, a small, sad smile on his face. He gave her a nod, and in that moment Julia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. As she was led away by her lawyers, Julia's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Zoe. "It's done. The storm's about to break. Be ready." Julia smiled grimly. She had taken the first step towards redemption, but she knew the journey was far from over. The game had changed once again, and this time Julia was determined to play it on her own terms. Little did she know, as she walked out of the press conference into an uncertain future, that her actions had set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of not just the cosmetics industry, but the entire corporate world. In the days that followed, Julia watched from the sidelines as the empire she had built crumbled. The FDA inspection revealed even more violations than she had confessed to. Major retailers pulled Urban Shield products from their shelves. The stock price plummeted, and investors fled in droves. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. Julia's honesty, her willingness to take responsibility when so many other CEOs would have denied and deflected, struck a chord with the public. Social media buzzed with discussions about corporate responsibility and ethical business practices. Former employees came forward with stories of Julia's kindness and integrity in the early days of Urban Shield. As she sat in her lawyer's office, preparing for the legal battles ahead, Julia received an unexpected visitor. It was Marcus Delacroix, the consultant who had helped launch Urban Shield all those years ago. "Julia," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "That was quite a show you put on." She met his gaze steadily. "It wasn't a show, Marcus, it was the truth." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, and that's why I'm here. I have a proposition for you." Julia raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "I'm listening." "The cosmetics industry is in shambles after your revelations. There's a void in the market and, more importantly, a desperate need for ethical leadership," Marcus explained. "I'm putting together a team to create a new company, one built on transparency, sustainability, and genuine care for consumers. And I want you to lead it." Julia stared at him, stunned. "Me? Marcus, I'm probably facing jail time. My reputation is in tatters. Why would you want me?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because you did the right thing, Julia. When it mattered most, you chose integrity over self-preservation. That's the kind of leader this industry needs." As Julia considered his words, she felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. Perhaps this wasn't the end after all. Perhaps it was a new beginning. "I'll need time to think about it," she said finally. Marcus nodded, standing to leave. "Of course. But don't take too long. The world is waiting to see what Julia Reeves will do next." As the door closed behind him, Julia turned to gaze out the window at the Baltimore skyline. The city that had witnessed her rise and fall now seemed to hold the promise of redemption. She thought of Evan, of the faith he had shown in her even after all these years. She thought of Zoe, standing by her side through the storm. And she thought of all the people who had been hurt by Urban Shield's practices, the consumers who had trusted her products, the employees who had believed in her vision. Julia took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose settling over her. This was her chance to make things right, to build something truly meaningful. But it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was fraught with legal battles, public scrutiny, and the monumental task of rebuilding trust. As she pondered Marcus's offer, Julia's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Evan. "Saw the news. You did the right thing, Jules. If you need anything, I'm here." A small smile tugged at her lips. Perhaps she wouldn't have to face this journey alone after all. Just then there was a knock at the door. Julia's lawyer entered, his face grave. "Ms. Reeves, I'm afraid I have some news. The FBI is here. They want to talk to you about Carlos Vasquez." Julia felt her heart rate quicken. "Carlos? What about him?" The lawyer hesitated. "They believe he's fled the country with sensitive company information, and they think you might have been involved." The room seemed to spin around Julia. Just when she thought she could see a way forward, another obstacle appeared. The accusations against her were false, of course, but would anyone believe her now? As she followed her lawyer out to meet the FBI agents, Julia realized that her journey was far from over. The fall of Urban Shield was just the beginning. The real test of her character, of her newfound commitment to integrity, was yet to come. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before her as Julia walked towards the conference room where the FBI agents waited. Each step felt heavy, laden with the weight of her past decisions and the uncertainty of her future. As she entered the room, two stern-faced agents looked up from their files. Julia straightened her shoulders, determined to face whatever came next with the same honesty she had shown at the press conference. "Ms. Reeves," one of the agents began, his voice clipped and professional, "we have some questions about your relationship with Carlos Vasquez and his recent disappearance." Julia took a deep breath. "I'll tell you everything I know," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. As the questioning began, Julia couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. Once again, she found herself laying bare the inner workings of Urban Shield, this time to federal agents rather than reporters. She detailed her history with Carlos, his rise through the company ranks, and her growing suspicions about his methods. "I had no idea he was planning to flee," Julia insisted, her eyes meeting the agent's gazes unflinchingly. "And I certainly had no part in it. In fact, I was as shocked as anyone when I learned of his disappearance." The agents exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "Ms. Reeves," the second agent said, leaning forward slightly, "we have evidence suggesting that large sums of money were transferred from Urban Shield accounts to offshore banks in the days leading up to Mr. Vasquez's disappearance. Can you explain that?" Julia felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. I would have known about any large transfers." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her mind. In the chaos of the past few weeks, how much had she really known about the day-to-day operations of her company? Had she been so focused on damage control that she had missed Carlos's final betrayal? The questioning continued for hours, each new revelation feeling like another nail in the coffin of Julia's hopes for redemption. By the time the agents finally left, promising to be in touch, Julia felt drained, both physically and emotionally. As she slumped in her chair, her lawyer placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Ms. Reeves. You've done nothing wrong." Julia nodded numbly, but inside she wasn't so sure. She hadn't authorized those transfers, hadn't known about Carlos's plan to flee. But wasn't she ultimately responsible for everything that happened at Urban Shield? Wasn't that the price of being at the top? As she gathered her things to leave, Julia's phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was from Marcus Delacroix. "Heard about the FBI, don't lose hope, the offer still stands. The world needs leaders who can weather storms." Julia stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling within her. Part of her wanted to accept Marcus's offer immediately, to throw herself into building something new and better. But another part, the part that had grown cynical and wary over years of corporate battles, wondered if this was just another trap. As she stepped out of the building into the cool Baltimore evening, Julia found herself at a crossroads. To her left lay the path of caution, hiring the best lawyers money could buy, fighting the accusations tooth and nail, perhaps even fleeing like Carlos had done. To her right was the path of risk, accepting Marcus's offer, facing the music head-on, and trying to rebuild not just a company, but her entire life's purpose. Julia closed her eyes, letting the gentle breeze wash over her. In that moment, she thought of Evan, of the faith he had shown in her. She thought of Zoe standing by her side through the darkest days. And she thought of all the people who had been hurt by Urban Shield's practices, the consumers who had trusted her products, the employees who had believed in her vision. When she opened her eyes, Julia knew what she had to do. It wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was fraught with legal battles, public scrutiny, and the monumental task of rebuilding trust. But for the first time in years, Julia felt a sense of true purpose. She pulled out her phone and typed out 2 messages. The first was to Marcus. "I'm in. Let's build something that matters." The second was to Evan. "I could use a friend right now. Coffee tomorrow?" As she hit send on both messages, Julia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The storm wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone. And this time, she would face it with integrity, no matter the cost. Little did Julia know, as she hailed a taxi to take her home, that her decision that night would set in motion a chain of events that would not only redefine her life, but would send shockwaves through the entire corporate world. The Julia Reeves who climbed into that taxi was not the same woman who had stood atop the urban shield empire just weeks ago. She was someone new, someone forged in the fires of failure and redemption, someone ready to take on the world not for personal gain, but for the greater good. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying Julia towards an uncertain but hopeful future, the Baltimore skyline glittered in the distance. It was the same city where she had built her empire, where she had lost everything, and where, just maybe, she would find a way to make things right. The game had changed once again. But this time, Julia Reeves was ready to play by a whole new set of rules. The Baltimore sun had barely crested the horizon when Julia Reeves strode into the gleaming lobby of the newly christened Integrity Cosmetics headquarters. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her. It was a constant reminder of the lessons learned from Urban Shield's downfall and her personal journey of redemption. As she made her way to the elevator, Julia caught sight of her reflection in the polished marble walls. At 38, she looked different from the ruthless CEO she had once been. There was a softness to her eyes now, a humility in her bearing that spoke of hard-won wisdom, but the determined set of her jaw remained, a testament to the fire that still burned within her. The elevator dinged, and Julia stepped out onto the top floor, greeted by the hustle and bustle of a company on the rise. Integrity Cosmetics, born from the ashes of Urban Shield, had quickly become a beacon of ethical business practices in the industry. Under Julia's leadership, and with Marcus Delacroix's guidance, they had built something truly revolutionary, a cosmetics company that prioritized transparency, sustainability, and consumer safety above all else. "Morning, Julia," Zoe called out, falling into step beside her. "Ready for the big day?" Julia nodded, a mix of excitement and apprehension churning in her stomach. Today was the day they would unveil their groundbreaking new line of products, the culmination of 2 years of intense research and development. It was also the day that could make or break Integrity Cosmetics' future. As they entered the conference room, Julia was struck by the nervous energy that permeated the air. Her executive team sat around the table, faces a mix of anticipation and worry. At the head of the table stood Marcus, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Ah, Julia," he said, gesturing for her to take her seat. "Shall we begin?" Julia settled into her chair, taking a deep breath to center herself. "Let's do this." For the next hour, they went over every detail of the product launch, the eco-friendly packaging, the revolutionary formulas that were both effective and safe, the marketing campaign that emphasized transparency and consumer education. Everything had to be perfect. As the meeting wound down, Marcus cleared his throat. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," he said, his tone grave. "It seems our old friend Carlos Vasquez has resurfaced." Julia felt her blood run cold. Carlos. The name still had the power to send a shiver down her spine, even after all this time. "What do you mean, resurfaced?" Marcus slid a tablet across the table. On it was a news article, the headline blaring, "Former Urban Shield executive returns, launches rival company." Julia scanned the article, her heart racing. Carlos had indeed returned to the United States, apparently having cut a deal with the authorities. And now he was back in the game with a new company that promised to revolutionize the cosmetics industry. "This can't be a coincidence," Julia muttered, looking up at her team. "Launching right before our big reveal? He's trying to steal our thunder." Zoe leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "It's worse than that, Julia. Look at their product line." Julia scrolled through the article, her eyes widening in disbelief. The products Carlos was launching were eerily similar to Integrity's new line. Too similar. "How is this possible?" she demanded, her voice rising. "We've kept everything under wraps. Our security protocols were apparently not as foolproof as we thought," Marcus finished grimly. We have to consider the possibility that we have a leak. The room erupted into chaos, accusations and denials flying. Julia sat back, her mind reeling. A leak. A betrayal from within. It was Urban Shield all over again. As the arguing reached a fever pitch, Julia stood abruptly. "Enough!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the din. "This is exactly what Carlos wants. To throw us off balance, to make us doubt each other. We can't let him win." She took a deep breath, looking each team member in the eye. "We've worked too hard, come too far to let this derail us. Yes, Carlos's move is a setback, but we have something he doesn't. Integrity. We built this company on honesty and transparency. That's our strength, and that's what we're going to lean into." Her words seemed to calm the room, but Julia could still see the doubt lingering in her team's eyes. She knew she had to do more, had to find a way to turn this situation around. "Zoe," she said, turning to her trusted advisor, "I need you to dig deeper into Carlos's company. Find out everything you can about their products, their investors, their plans. If he's using our stolen research, we'll find proof." Zoe nodded, already pulling out her phone to make calls. "Marcus," Julia continued, "reach out to our legal team. I want to know our options if Carlos really is using our intellectual property." As the team dispersed, each with their marching orders, Julia found herself alone in the conference room. She walked to the window, gazing out at the Baltimore skyline. Somewhere out there, Carlos was plotting his next move, ready to destroy everything she had worked so hard to rebuild. But this time, Julia was ready for him. This time, she wouldn't let ambition blind her to the truth. This time, she would fight not just for herself, but for everything Integrity Cosmetics stood for. As she turned back to her desk, determined to dive into damage control, Julia's phone buzzed with a message. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the sender. "Evan. Saw the news about Carlos, you okay? Want to grab coffee?" Julia hesitated, her finger hovering over the reply button. Evan had been a rock for her over the past 2 years, his unwavering support helping her navigate the treacherous waters of rebuilding her life and career. But lately, things had been complicated. The old feelings she had buried years ago had begun to resurface, and Julia wasn't sure she was ready to confront them, especially not now. But as she stared at the message, Julia realized that she needed a perspective outside of Integrity Cosmetics. Someone who knew her, really knew her, before Urban Shield, before the scandal, before everything. "Coffee sounds great," she typed back. "The usual place in an hour." An hour later, Julia found herself sliding into a booth at their favorite coffee shop, a cozy little place tucked away from the bustle of downtown Baltimore. Evan was already there, 2 steaming mugs on the table in front of him. "You remembered my order," Julia said, smiling as she picked up the latte. Evan shrugged, a boyish grin on his face. "Some things you don't forget." For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the familiarity of the situation washing over them. Then Evan leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "So, Carlos is back," he said, cutting straight to the chase. "How are you holding up?" Julia sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Honestly, I'm scared, Evan. Everything we've built at Integrity, everything we stand for, Carlos could destroy it all." Evan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Hey, look at me," he said softly. Julia met his gaze, finding strength in the warmth of his brown eyes. "You're not the same person you were at Urban Shield. You're stronger now, wiser, and you're not alone." Julia felt a lump form in her throat. "I know," she whispered. "It's just, I can't help feeling like this is karma. Like no matter how hard I try to make things right, my past will always come back to haunt me." Evan squeezed her hand. "Julia, listen to me. What you've done with Integrity Cosmetics, the changes you've made in the industry, that's real, that matters. Don't let Carlos make you doubt yourself." As Julia looked into Evan's eyes, she felt a surge of emotions, gratitude, affection, and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed insistently. "I'm sorry," she said, reluctantly pulling her hand away to check the message. It was from Zoe. "Emergency at the office, you need to see this." Julia looked up at Evan, apology written across her face. He nodded in understanding. "Go," he said. "But Julia, remember what I said. You're not alone in this." As Julia rushed back to the office, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions and strategies. Whatever Zoe had found, whatever crisis awaited her, She would face it head-on. With renewed determination, she strode into Integrity's headquarters, ready for battle. The scene that greeted her was one of barely controlled chaos. Employees huddled in groups, whispering frantically. The usual hum of productivity had been replaced by a tense, anxious energy. Zoe intercepted her at the elevator, her face grim. "Julia, thank God you're here. It's worse than we thought." She led Julia to the conference room, where Marcus and the rest of the executive team were already gathered. The atmosphere was thick with tension. "What's going on?" Julia demanded, looking from face to face. Marcus gestured to the large screen on the wall. "See for yourself." Julia turned to the screen and felt her heart drop. It was a live stream of a press conference, and at the podium stood Carlos Vasquez, looking as sleek and confident as ever. "And so it is with great pride that I announce the launch of Phoenix Cosmetics," Carlos was saying, his charismatic smile beaming at the cameras. "Our mission is simple: to provide consumers with safe, effective products that they can trust. We believe in total transparency, in ethical business practices, and in putting the customer first." Julia felt her fists clench at her sides. Carlos was using Integrity's own language, their own mission statement, twisting it for his own purposes. But Carlos wasn't finished. "And in the spirit of that transparency," he continued, his eyes glinting with malice, "I feel it's my duty to inform the public about some disturbing information that has come to light." Julia's breath caught in her throat. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what was coming next. Documents have recently surfaced that show Integrity Cosmetics, under the leadership of Julia Reeves, has been engaging in the very practices they claim to stand against. Safety protocols ignored, environmental regulations sidestepped, all in the name of profit. The room erupted into shocked exclamations. Julia stood frozen, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not again. "It's all lies," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then louder, "It's all lies. We've done everything by the book. Our practices are beyond reproach." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "We know that, Julia. But the public, they're going to need more than our word." As if on cue, phones around the room began to buzz. Twitter was exploding with the hashtag #IntegrityLies. News outlets were already picking up the story. Julia felt the room spinning around her. This was Urban Shield all over again, but worse. Because this time she was innocent. This time she had done everything right. And still, it wasn't enough. As her team scrambled to respond, to craft statements and contact lawyers, Julia found herself walking to the window. The Baltimore skyline, which had once represented all her dreams and ambitions, now seemed to mock her. How had Carlos done this? Where had he gotten these so-called documents? And more importantly, how could she fight back against lies and manipulation when the truth seemed so fragile, so easy to distort? Just then her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. "The truth will set you free, but first, it will make you miserable." Julia stared at the cryptic message, her mind racing. Could it be Evan? But why the secrecy? And what did he mean? As she pondered the message, a realization began to dawn. The truth. That had always been her strength, her redemption. Even in the darkest days of the Urban Shield scandal, it was her commitment to honesty that had seen her through. With sudden clarity, Julia knew what she had to do. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but it was the only way. She turned back to her team, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Enough," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "We're not going to hide. We're not going to spin this. We're going to fight fire with fire." Her team looked at her, confusion and worry etched on their faces. "Call a press conference," Julia continued, her voice gaining strength. "Right now, in front of our headquarters. We're going to invite every reporter, every blogger, every social media influencer in Baltimore." "Julia," Marcus began, his tone cautious, "are you sure that's wise? We need time to prepare, to craft our message." "No," Julia interrupted. "No more crafted messages. No more carefully worded statements. We're going to give them the truth, all of it, right now." As her team sprang into action, Julia took a moment to center herself. She thought of Evan, of his unwavering faith in her. She thought of the message on her phone. "The truth will set you free." An hour later, Julia stood before a sea of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust towards her. The steps of Integrity Cosmetics headquarters had become an impromptu stage, with curious onlookers gathering at the edges of the crowd. Julia took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders and began to speak. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Julia Reeves, CEO of Integrity Cosmetics. By now I'm sure you've all heard the accusations made against our company by Carlos Vasquez of Phoenix Cosmetics." She paused, letting the murmur of the crowd die down. "Mr. Vasquez claims to have documents proving that Integrity has engaged in unethical practices. He paints a picture of a company that prioritizes profit over people, that cuts corners and ignores regulations." Julia leaned forward, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Those accusations are false, completely and utterly false." The crowd erupted in questions, but Julia held up a hand, silencing them. "I stand before you today not to offer denials or excuses, but to offer the truth, the whole truth, because that's what Integrity Cosmetics is built on, and that's what I believe in." And with that, Julia began to speak. She detailed every aspect of Integrity's operations, from their sourcing practices to their testing protocols. She invited reporters to tour their facilities, to speak with their scientists and factory workers. She offered complete access to their financial records and internal communications. "We have nothing to hide," Julia said, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "Because we have built this company on a foundation of honesty and transparency. Those aren't just buzzwords for us. They're our core values, the principles that guide every decision we make." As she spoke, Julia could see the mood of the crowd shifting. Skepticism gave way to interest, then to grudging respect. "But I'm not here just to defend Integrity," Julia continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I'm here to ask questions. Questions that I think the public deserves answers to." She turned, seeming to address the cameras directly. "Mr. Vasquez, you claim to have documents proving wrongdoing on our part. I ask you, where did these documents come from? How did you obtain them? And why, if you truly care about ethics and transparency, did you choose to reveal them in this manner, rather than bringing your concerns to the proper authorities?" Julia paused, letting her words sink in. "I'll tell you why," she said, her voice low and intense. "Because those documents don't exist. Because this is nothing more than a cynical attempt to undermine a competitor. Because Carlos Vasquez cares about one thing and one thing only: power." The crowd was silent now, hanging on her every word. "I know Carlos Vasquez," Julia continued. "I worked with him at Urban Shield. I saw firsthand the lengths he would go to for success, and I made the mistake once of following his lead, of prioritizing profit over people, of losing sight of what really matters." She took a deep breath, emotion coloring her voice. "I've paid for that mistake. So I've faced the consequences of my actions, and I've spent the last 2 years working tirelessly to make amends, to build a company that truly lives up to its name." Julia straightened, her eyes blazing with determination. "So yes, Mr. Vasquez, let's talk about integrity. Let's talk about ethics. Let's open our books, our labs, our factories to the world. Let's let the public decide who they can trust." She turned back to the crowd, her voice softening. "To everyone watching, I make this promise. Integrity Cosmetics will continue to operate with complete transparency. We will continue to prioritize safety, sustainability, and honesty above all else. And we will never, ever take your trust for granted." As Julia finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions, clamoring for more details. But Julia's eyes were drawn to a figure at the back of the crowd. Evan stood there, a proud smile on his face. He gave her a small nod, and Julia felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had done it. She had faced the storm head-on and come out stronger. As Julia stepped away from the microphones, her team surrounding her with congratulations and support, she felt a sense of lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The truth had indeed set her free. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. As they made their way back into the Integrity headquarters, Zoe rushed up to Julia, her face pale. "Julia, you need to see this," she said, thrusting a tablet into her hands. On the screen was a live feed from another press conference. Carlos Vasquez stood at the podium, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "Ms. Reeves's impassioned speech was certainly moving," he was saying, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But pretty words can't erase hard evidence. And I'm afraid I have more than just documents to share with you today." Julia felt her heart drop as Carlos gestured to someone off-screen. A moment later, a familiar face appeared beside him. It was Sarah, Integrity's head of research and development. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlos continued, a triumphant gleam in his eye, "I'd like you to meet Sarah Thompson, formerly of Integrity Cosmetics. Sarah has bravely come forward to reveal the truth about Julia Reeves and her so-called ethical company." Sarah stepped up to the microphone, her eyes downcast. I can't be part of the deception any longer," she began, her voice trembling. "Everything Mr. Vasquez has said is true. Integrity Cosmetics has been cutting corners, ignoring safety protocols, all while presenting a false image of transparency to the public." Julia stared at the screen in disbelief. Sarah had been with her from the beginning, one of the few who had followed her from Urban Shield to Integrity. She had trusted Sarah implicitly. How could this be happening? As Sarah continued to detail alleged violations and unethical practices, Julia felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The triumph of just moments ago evaporated, replaced by a sickening sense of déjà vu. "This can't be happening," she murmured, looking around at her shell-shocked team. "We've done everything right. Everything." Marcus placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Julia, we need to respond to this. Now." But before Julia could gather her thoughts, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but something made her answer. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Hello, Julia?" Carlos's smooth voice purred through the speaker. "Enjoying the show?" Julia's free hand clenched into a fist. "Carlos, you snake. What have you done? How did you get to Sarah?" Carlos chuckled, the sound sending chills down Julia's spine. "Oh, Julia, still so naive. Did you really think you could beat me at my own game? I've been planning this for years, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." "But why?" Julia demanded. "Why go to all this trouble?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Carlos spoke again, his voice was cold, all pretense of charm gone. "Because you ruined me, Julia. Your little confession at Urban Shield destroyed everything I had built, and now I'm returning the favor." The line went dead, leaving Julia staring at her phone in shock. As the implications of Carlos's words sank in, Julia felt a surge of emotions: anger, fear, desperation. But underneath it all, a steely determination began to form. She had fought her way back from rock bottom once before. She could do it again. Julia turned to her team, her eyes blazing with renewed purpose. "All right, listen up. Carlos thinks he's won, but he's underestimated us. He's underestimated me." She began pacing, her mind racing. "Zoe, I need you to dig into Sarah's background. Find out everything you can about her recent activities, her finances, anything that might explain her sudden betrayal." Zoe nodded, already pulling out her phone. "Marcus," Julia continued, "get our legal team on this. I want to know our options for fighting these allegations." As her team sprang into action, Julia felt a familiar energy coursing through her veins. This was what she was made for. Crisis management, strategic thinking under pressure. But this time she had something she didn't have during the Urban Shield scandal. The truth on her side. Just then there was a commotion at the office entrance. Julia turned to see Evan pushing his way past security, his face a mask of concern. "Julia," he said, slightly out of breath, "I saw Carlos's press conference. Are you okay?" The sight of Evan rushing to her side in her moment of need caused something to shift inside Julia. In that instant, she realized that she wasn't just fighting for her company or her reputation, she was fighting for a future that she suddenly understood with crystal clarity. She wanted Evan to be a part of. "I'm okay," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "In fact, I'm better than okay. I'm ready to fight." Evan's face broke into a proud smile. "That's the Julia I know. What can I do to help?" As Julia began to outline her plan, bringing Evan into the fold, she felt a surge of confidence. Carlos might have landed a heavy blow, but the battle was far from over. With her team by her side, the truth as her weapon and Evan's unwavering support, Julia Reeves was ready to face whatever came next. Little did she know as they huddled together, strategizing late into the night, that the greatest challenge and the most unexpected ally was yet to come. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would not only determine the fate of Integrity Cosmetics, but would redefine the entire landscape of the industry. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the office windows, Julia stood at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Her team had worked through the night, piecing together the puzzle of Carlos's elaborate scheme. Zoe approached, dark circles under her eyes, but a triumphant gleam in her gaze. "Julia, we've got something. You're not going to believe this." She handed Julia a thick file. As Julia flipped through the pages, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Is this verified?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zoe nodded. "Triple-checked. It's all there." Julia looked up, a slow smile spreading across her face. For the first time since Carlos's bombshell, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Get everyone together," she said. "It's time to end this." An hour later, Julia stood before her team, Evan by her side. The room was thick with anticipation. "What we've uncovered," Julia began, her voice steady and determined, "is more than just a counter to Carlos's accusations. It's the key to bringing down his entire operation." She gestured to the screen behind her, where a complex web of financial transactions and shell companies was displayed. "Carlos didn't just plan this attack on integrity," Julia explained. "He's been manipulating the entire industry for years. Price fixing, industrial espionage, even sabotaging competitors' products. And Sarah, she wasn't just a turncoat. She was a plant, working for Carlos from the very beginning." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Julia held up a hand for silence. "I know this is a lot to take in, but here's the thing, we have proof. Irrefutable, documented proof of every illegal and unethical action Carlos has taken over the past 5 years." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Now, we could take this to the authorities. We could watch Carlos's empire crumble from the sidelines. But that's not enough. Not for what he's done to us, to this industry, to the consumers who trust us." Julia's eyes blazed with determination. "We're going to confront Carlos directly, on his turf in front of the whole world. And we're going to give him a choice: come clean and face the consequences, or watch everything he's built turn to ash." The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in a chorus of agreement and support. As the team began to mobilize, putting the final touches on their plan, Evan pulled Julia aside. "Jules," he said softly, his eyes searching hers, "are you sure about this? It's risky. If something goes wrong—" Julia reached up, cupping Evan's face in her hand. "I'm sure. For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I need to do." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings between them seemed to crystallize. Evan leaned in, his lips meeting Julia's in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Julia felt a new strength coursing through her. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice filled with determination. Hours later, Julia stood backstage at the grand ballroom of the Baltimore Convention Center. Beyond the curtain, she could hear the buzz of a packed house. Industry insiders, media, and curious members of the public, all gathered for what Phoenix Cosmetics had billed as a game-changing announcement. Julia smoothed down her suit, taking a deep breath to center herself. Her team was in position, the evidence secure. Everything was ready. Just then, her phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "You've got this, Jules. No matter what happens, I'm with you." A warmth spread through Julia's chest. Whatever the outcome today, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. The crowd's murmur suddenly hushed, and Julia heard Carlos's smooth voice echoing through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Phoenix Cosmetics is about to usher in a new era of beauty." Julia steeled herself. It was time. With purposeful strides, she emerged from behind the curtain, making her way down the center aisle of the ballroom. A ripple of shocked whispers followed in her wake. Carlos faltered mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he spotted Julia. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his composure slipping. Julia climbed the steps to the stage, her gaze never leaving Carlos's face. "Hello, Carlos," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "I believe you and I have some unfinished business to discuss." The tension in the room was palpable as Julia and Carlos faced each other, years of history and betrayal hanging between them. The audience held its collective breath, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Julia," Carlos said, his voice a forced calm, "this is a private event. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." Julia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I don't think so, Carlos. In fact, I think everyone here will want to hear what I have to say." She turned to address the crowd, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you all need to know. Carlos Vasquez is not the ethical businessman he claims to be. In fact, he's been manipulating this entire industry for years. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Carlos lunged for the microphone, but Julia was faster. Price fixing, industrial espionage, product sabotage. Carlos has done it all, and I have proof. With a nod to Zoe at the back of the room, the large screens behind the stage came to life, displaying damning emails, financial records, and surveillance footage. "This is preposterous," Carlos sputtered, his face red with anger. "These are clearly fabricated." "Are they, Carlos?" Julia interrupted. "Because I think Sarah Thompson might disagree." On cue, Sarah emerged from the wings, her face pale but determined. "It's all true," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was hired by Carlos to infiltrate Integrity Cosmetics. Everything I said at the press conference was a lie, fed to me by Carlos himself." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and security guards looked uncertainly between Carlos and Julia, unsure of who they should be restraining. Amidst the pandemonium, Julia locked eyes with Carlos. For a moment she saw a flicker of the man she had once known, brilliant, ambitious, but ultimately corrupted by greed and the pursuit of power. "It's over, Carlos," she said softly. "You can fight this, drag it out in the courts and the media. Or you can do the right thing for once, come clean, take responsibility." For a long moment, Carlos said nothing. Then, to Julia's surprise, a wry smile spread across his face. "Well played, Julia," he said, his voice barely audible above the din. "I underestimated you, again." With that, Carlos turned to face the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the noise, "I'm afraid I owe you all an apology." As Carlos began his confession, Julia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Relief, triumph, and a bittersweet sadness for what might have been. She had won, but at what cost? Just then, she felt a hand slip into hers. She turned to see Evan standing beside her, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Jules," he whispered. Julia squeezed his hand, feeling anchored by his presence. Yes, she had done it. She had faced her past, confronted her demons, and come out stronger on the other side. As the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in, Julia realized that this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a turning point for the entire industry. The revelations of today would lead to investigations, reforms, and a new era of transparency and accountability. And Integrity Cosmetics, with its unwavering commitment to ethics and honesty, was perfectly positioned to lead the way. As reporters swarmed the stage, clamoring for comments and interviews, Julia took a deep breath. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and hard work ahead, but for the first time in years, Julia Reeves felt truly at peace. She had faced her past, redeemed her mistakes, and found a way to make a real difference in the world. And with Evan by her side and her loyal team behind her, she was ready for whatever came next. As the chaos of the press conference swirled around them, Julia turned to Evan, a soft smile playing on her lips. "So," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what do you say we get out of here and start planning our next adventure?" Evan's eyes sparkled with love and excitement. "Lead the way, Jules. I'm with you, always." Hand in hand, they made their way through the crowd towards a future bright with possibility. The story of Julia Reeves, once a cautionary tale of ambition gone wrong, had become a testament to the power of redemption, integrity, and second chances. And as they stepped out into the warm Baltimore sunshine, Julia knew that the best chapters of her life were yet to be written. The Baltimore skyline glittered in the early morning light as Julia Reeves stood at the window of her modest apartment, sipping her coffee and reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had led her to this moment. It had been 6 months since the explosive confrontation with Carlos Vasquez that had shaken the cosmetics industry to its core, and the aftershocks were still reverberating. Julia set down her mug and picked up the newspaper on her kitchen counter. The headline read, "Cosmetics Industry Reform Act Passes Senate." She smiled, a mixture of pride and humility washing over her. The act, spearheaded by a coalition of ethical businesses and consumer advocacy groups, was a direct result of the revelations that had come to light during the Carlos Vasquez scandal. It promised stricter regulations, increased transparency, and harsher penalties for companies that put profit over consumer safety. As she scanned the article, her eyes fell on a quote from Senator Maria Hernandez. "This act is a testament to the power of individual integrity, We owe a debt of gratitude to whistleblowers like Julia Reeves, who had the courage to stand up and demand change. Julia shook her head, still uncomfortable with being hailed as a hero. The truth was far more complex, and she knew it. Her journey had been one of redemption, of facing her own past mistakes, and fighting to make them right. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Evan. "Ready for your first day, don't be nervous, you've got this." Julia smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Evan, her rock, her partner, her boss. The thought still felt strange, but in a good way. After the dust had settled from the Carlos incident, Julia had found herself at a crossroads. Integrity Cosmetics, while cleared of wrongdoing, had suffered significant damage to its reputation. The board had decided that a fresh start was needed, and Julia had agreed to step down as CEO. It had been a difficult decision, but ultimately, Julia knew it was the right one. She had built Integrity Cosmetics as a symbol of her own redemption, but now it was time for the company to stand on its own, free from the baggage of her past. That's when Evan had approached her with an unexpected proposition. His environmental consulting firm, Green Future Solutions, was expanding into the consumer goods sector, and he wanted Julia to head up the new division. Who better to guide companies towards ethical practices than someone who's seen both sides of the coin, he had said. Julia had hesitated at first. Working for Evan, given their personal relationship, seemed complicated, but the more she thought about it, the more right it felt. This was a chance to make a real difference, to use her experience, and both good and bad, to help shape a more ethical future for the industry. As she got ready for her first day, Julia's mind wandered to the other players in the drama that had unfolded. Carlos Vasquez was serving a 10-year sentence for fraud, insider trading, and a host of other charges. His fall from grace had been spectacular, but Julia took no joy in it. Instead, she felt a complex mixture of sadness for what could have been, and relief that justice had been served. Sarah Thompson, the former Integrity employee who had been Carlos's mole, had turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity. Last Julia had heard, she was working with a non-profit organization dedicated to corporate accountability, using her insider knowledge to help prevent future scandals. Zoe Chen, Julia's loyal right-hand woman at Integrity, had stayed on with the company, helping to steer it through the transition. They still met for coffee regularly, and Julia was proud to see her friend thriving in her new role as Chief Operating Officer. Marcus Delacroix had retired, citing the need for new blood in the industry. But he remained a valued mentor to Julia, always available for advice or a much-needed pep talk. As for Integrity Cosmetics itself, the company was slowly but surely rebuilding its reputation under new leadership. Julia kept tabs on its progress, feeling like a proud parent watching a child grow and evolve. Julia took one last look in the mirror, straightening her blazer. The woman who looked back at her was different from the ambitious young entrepreneur who had started Urban Shield, and different still from the chastened but determined leader who had built Integrity Cosmetics. This Julia Reeves was older, wiser, with lines of experience etched around her eyes and a quiet confidence in her bearing. She grabbed her bag and headed out, the spring air filled with the promise of new beginnings. As she walked to the Green Future offices, Julia found herself thinking about the long, winding road that had led her here, the triumphs and failures, the friendships forged and lost, the lessons learned at great cost. All of it had shaped her into the person she was today. The Green Future building was a modern structure of glass and sustainable materials, a physical embodiment of the company's ethos. As Julia approached the entrance, she saw Evan waiting for her, a warm smile on his face. "Ready to change the world?" he asked, offering her a cup of coffee, her favorite blend, she noted with a smile. Julia took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. "One ethical decision at a time," she replied, returning his smile. As they walked into the building together, Julia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, using her hard-won wisdom to guide others towards a more ethical future. The day passed in a blur of introductions, meetings, and strategy sessions. Julia was impressed by the passion and dedication of her new team, many of whom had been drawn to Green Future because of its commitment to sustainability and ethical practices. In the afternoon, Julia found herself in a conference room facing the CEO of a mid-sized cosmetics company. The woman, barely older than Julia had been when she started Urban Shield, looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Reeves," she began, "I'll be honest. When my board suggested we bring in a consultant to help us improve our ethical practices, I was skeptical. But after everything that happened with the Vasquez scandal, well, we can't afford not to change. And there's no one more qualified to guide us than you. Julia leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. I appreciate your honesty, and I want you to know that I understand exactly what you're going through. The pressure to cut corners, to prioritize profits over people, I've been there. But I've also seen firsthand the consequences of those choices. She paused, making sure she had the CEO's full attention. What I can promise you is this. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, and it isn't always immediately profitable. But in the long run, it's the only sustainable way to do business. And more importantly, it's how you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and be proud of what you see. The CEO nodded slowly, a look of resolve settling over her features. Where do we start? As Julia launched into an overview of their approach, she felt a familiar thrill. This was what she was meant to do. Not just running a single ethical company, but helping to transform an entire industry. The rest of the week flew by, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities. Julia threw herself into the work, relishing the chance to apply her experience in a new context. She was no longer the public face of a company, no longer under the constant scrutiny of the media and shareholders. Instead, she could focus on the work itself, on making a real difference behind the scenes. On Friday evening, as Julia was packing up to leave, Evan knocked on her office door. "Busy?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Julia smiled, feeling the week's tension start to melt away at the sight of him. "Never too busy for you. What's up?" Evan entered the office, closing the door behind him. "I was thinking, it's been a pretty intense first week. How about we get out of the city for the weekend? I know a great little bed and breakfast up in the mountains. No cell service, no internet, just us, nature, and some much-needed relaxation." Julia felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. Despite their long history and the deep bond between them, this thing with Evan still felt new and thrilling. They had agreed to take things slow, to make sure their personal relationship didn't interfere with their professional one. But the idea of a weekend away, just the two of them, was incredibly tempting. "That sounds perfect," she said, surprising herself with how readily she agreed. "Let me just finish up here and we can head out." As they drove out of the city, the skyscrapers giving way to rolling hills and then to mountains, Julia felt the last of her stress melt away. She looked over at Evan, his profile illuminated by the setting sun, and felt a surge of gratitude for his unwavering support, for his belief in her even when she had lost faith in herself, for the second chance he had given her, both personally and professionally. The bed and breakfast was everything Evan had promised, a cozy, rustic retreat nestled in the mountains. As they settled into their room, Julia found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. It was so different from the Baltimore skyline she was used to, yet somehow it felt like home. Evan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he murmured. Julia leaned back against him, savoring the warmth of his embrace. "I was just thinking about everything, how different my life is now compared to a year ago, how close I came to losing it all, how grateful I am for this second chance." Evan turned her gently to face him, his eyes serious. "Jules, you earned this second chance. You faced your mistakes head-on. You fought to make things right even when it would have been easier to run away. That takes a kind of courage most people can't even imagine." Julia felt tears prick at her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. Evan smiled, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Julia felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was what redemption felt like. Not the absence of past mistakes, but the wisdom gained from them. Not the erasure of scars, but the strength that came from healing. The weekend passed in a blissful blur of lazy mornings, long hikes, and intimate conversations by the fireplace. By the time they were driving back to Baltimore on Sunday evening, Julia felt refreshed and reinvigorated, ready to tackle whatever challenges the coming week might bring. As the city skyline came into view, Julia found herself thinking about the future, not just the immediate future of projects at Green Future or her evolving relationship with Evan, but the long-term impact of the work they were doing. "Evan," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them, Do you ever think about what the industry might look like in 10 years? 20? Evan glanced at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. All the time. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. The idea that we're laying the groundwork for real, lasting change. Julia nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. I was thinking, what if we could create some kind of industry-wide mentorship program, pairing experienced executives with up-and-coming entrepreneurs, focusing on ethical business practices right from the start? Evan's face lit up. That's brilliant, Jules. We could partner with business schools, maybe even create a certification program. As they brainstormed ideas, the excitement building between them, Julia felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why she had entered the business world in the first place, not for personal gain or glory, but to make a real difference. The next few months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Julia threw herself into her work at Green Future, helping companies large and small navigate the complex world of ethical business practices. The mentorship program she and Evan had dreamed up on that car ride became a reality, quickly gaining traction in the industry. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still those who resisted change, who saw ethical practices as a threat to their bottom line. Julia found herself facing skepticism, sometimes outright hostility, from old-school executives who saw her as a troublemaker. Yet for every setback, there were moments of triumph, like the day a small, family-owned cosmetics company implemented new sustainability practices and saw their sales soar, or the time a major corporation, initially resistant to change, became an industry leader in ethical sourcing after working with Julia's team. Through it all, Julia's relationship with Evan deepened and strengthened. They learned to navigate the tricky waters of being both romantic partners and colleagues, supporting each other professionally while nurturing their personal connection. 1 year to the day after Julia had started at Green Future, she found herself back in that same conference room, facing a new group of industry leaders. But this time she wasn't there to consult. She was there to present the findings of a year-long study on the impact of ethical business practices in the cosmetics industry. As she stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, Julia felt a sense of déjà vu. But this time, instead of nervousness or dread, she felt only calm determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and confident. "A year ago, our industry was in crisis. We had lost the trust of our consumers, and for good reason. We had prioritized profits over people, short-term gains over long-term sustainability." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Today, I'm here to tell you that we've made progress. Real, measurable progress. But our work is far from over." As Julia launched into the presentation, detailing the positive impacts of ethical practices on everything from consumer trust to employee satisfaction to long-term profitability, she could see the room becoming energized. These weren't just dry statistics. This was proof that doing the right thing could also be good business. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. As Julia fielded questions from the audience, she caught Evan's eye at the back of the room. He gave her a subtle thumbs up, his face beaming with pride. Later that evening, as they walked hand in hand along the Baltimore harbor, Evan turned to Julia with a mischievous glint in his eye. "So, Ms. Reeves, how does it feel to be changing the world?" Julia laughed, bumping her shoulder against his. "One ethical decision at a time, remember?" They stopped, looking out over the water. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, reflecting off the gentle waves. Julia was struck by how beautiful the city looked, how full of possibility. "You know," she said softly, "a few years ago I thought I had it all figured out. I thought success meant having the biggest company, the most money, the most power. I was so wrong." Evan squeezed her hand encouragingly, waiting for her to continue. "Now I know that true success is about making a positive impact. It's about lifting others up, not climbing over them. It's about leaving the world a little better than you found it." She turned to face Evan, her eyes shining with emotion. "And it's about finding someone to share it all with." Evan pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I couldn't agree more," he murmured. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the city stretching out before them, Julia felt a profound sense of contentment wash over her. Her journey had been long and often painful, filled with missteps and hard-learned lessons. But standing here now, she wouldn't change a thing, because every decision, every triumph and failure had led her to this moment. to a life filled with purpose, integrity, and love, to a future bright with the promise of positive change. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Julia Reeves looked out at the city she had once sought to conquer and now sought to improve, and she smiled, knowing that the best was yet to come. In the months and years that followed, Julia and Evan's vision of a more ethical, sustainable cosmetics industry began to take shape. The mentorship program they had started grew into a comprehensive industry-wide initiative, nurturing a new generation of business leaders committed to balancing profit with social responsibility. Julia became a sought-after speaker at business schools and industry conferences, sharing her story as a cautionary tale and a roadmap for redemption. She never shied away from discussing her past mistakes, using them as powerful object lessons in the importance of ethical decision-making. Green Future Solutions expanded its reach beyond the cosmetics industry, becoming a leading voice in the broader conversation about corporate social responsibility. Julia and Evan found themselves at the forefront of a growing movement, pushing for systemic changes in how businesses operated and were regulated. But even as their professional lives flourished, they never lost sight of what was truly important. They made time for quiet weekends away, for family dinners with Julia's parents, who had finally come around to accepting Evan, and for giving back to the Baltimore community that had been the backdrop for so much of their story. 5 years after that fateful confrontation with Carlos Vasquez, Julia found herself back in the Baltimore Convention Center. But this time, she wasn't there to expose corruption or fight for her professional life. She was there to deliver the keynote address at the first annual Ethical Business Summit, an event that had grown out of the mentorship program she and Evan had started. As she took the stage, looking out at a sea of faces representing companies from around the world, Julia felt a surge of emotion. This, she realized, was the culmination of everything she had been working towards. "Welcome," she began, her voice strong and clear. "5 years ago I stood on a stage not unlike this one, and I made a choice to tell the truth, to take responsibility for my actions, and to fight for a better way of doing business. Today I stand before you not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who is still learning, still growing, and still committed to making a positive difference in the world." As Julia spoke, she could see heads nodding, people leaning forward in their seats. She talked about the challenges they had faced, the progress they had made, and the work that still lay ahead. She shared stories of companies that had transformed their practices, of young entrepreneurs who were building ethical businesses from the ground up, and of consumers who were demanding more from the brands they supported. "But the most important lesson I've learned," Julia said, her voice softening, "is that we can't do this alone. Real change, lasting change, comes when we work together, when we share our knowledge, support each other's efforts, and hold each other accountable." As she concluded her speech, the room erupted in a standing ovation. Julia felt overwhelmed by the response, by the tangible sense of hope and determination that filled the air. This, she realized, was what success truly felt like. After the speech, as Julia made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions, she caught sight of a familiar face. It was Sarah Thompson, her former employee who had been caught up in Carlos's schemes. "Julia?" Sarah said, approaching hesitantly. I don't know if you remember me." "Of course I do, Sarah," Julia replied, her voice gentle. "How are you?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm doing well. I wanted to thank you. Your example, your willingness to give second chances, it inspired me. I've been working with a non-profit, helping companies implement ethical practices. I never thought I'd get a chance to make things right, but because of you," Julia reached out, squeezing Sarah's hand. "We all deserve a chance at redemption, Sarah. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished." As Sarah walked away, Julia felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Evan standing there, a proud smile on his face. "That was quite a speech, Ms. Reeves," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Think you might have inspired a few people today?" Julia laughed, leaning into him. "Maybe a few, but I couldn't have done any of this without you, you know." Evan wrapped an arm around her waist. "Partners in crime fighting, remember?" As they made their way out of the convention center, Julia was struck by how far they had come. From the ambitious young entrepreneurs dreaming of changing the world, to the battle-scarred survivors of corporate scandals, to this, leaders of a movement that was reshaping the very foundations of business. That night, as they sat on the balcony of their Baltimore apartment, Looking out over the city they had both tried to conquer and then learned to serve, Evan turned to Julia with a serious expression. "Jules," he said, taking her hand, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Julia's heart skipped a beat as Evan dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Julia Reeves," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "we've been through so much together, highs and lows, triumphs and failures, and through it all, my love for you has only grown stronger. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Julia's eyes as she looked at the ring, a simple, elegant band made from ethically sourced materials. It was so perfectly them. "Yes," she whispered, pulling Evan to his feet and into a passionate kiss. 1,000 times yes. As they embraced, the Baltimore skyline twinkling behind them, Julia felt a sense of completeness wash over her. This was what happily ever after looked like. Not a fairy tale ending, but a commitment to facing life's challenges together, to continuing to grow and learn and make a difference in the world. The next morning, as Julia prepared for another day at Green Future, she paused to look at herself in the mirror. The woman who gazed back at her was a far cry from the young, ambitious entrepreneur who had started Urban Shield, or even the chastened but determined leader who had built Integrity Cosmetics. This Julia Reeves was older, wiser, with laugh lines around her eyes and a quiet confidence in her bearing. But more than that, she was at peace, with her past, with her present, and with the future that stretched out before her. As she slipped on her engagement ring, Julia made a silent vow to never forget the lessons she had learned, to always strive to do what was right, and to use her experiences, both good and bad, to help others find their own path to redemption and success. With one last glance in the mirror, Julia grabbed her bag and headed out the door, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring, because she knew now that true success wasn't measured in dollars or power, but in the positive impact you could make on the world around you. And by that measure, Julia Reeves was just getting started. As she stepped out onto the streets of Baltimore, the city bustling with morning activity, Julia felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. The ethical business movement she and Evan had helped to spark was gaining momentum, but there was still so much work to be done. She thought about the young entrepreneurs she would be mentoring later that day, eager to build companies that prioritized people and planet alongside profit. She thought about the established corporations, slowly but surely changing their practices, proving that it was never too late to choose a better path. And she thought about the consumers, increasingly aware and demanding of the brands they supported, driving change from the ground up. Julia Reeves had once sought to conquer the business world. Now she was part of a movement to transform it. And as she walked towards the Green Future offices, her engagement ring catching the morning light, she knew that this purpose, this love, this commitment to making a difference was the greatest success she could have ever imagined. The story of Julia Reeves, once a cautionary tale of ambition gone wrong, had become a testament to the power of redemption, integrity, and the courage to change. And as she stepped into the future, hand in hand with Evan, and supported by a community of like-minded individuals, Julia knew that the best chapters were still to be written. In the end, her journey had taught her the most valuable lesson of all, that true success lies not in what you achieve for yourself, but in how you lift others up along the way. And with that knowledge guiding her every step, Julia Reeves was ready to face whatever challenges and triumphs the future might hold. The Baltimore sun shone brightly overhead, a new day full of possibilities stretching out before her. And Julia Reeves, once lost but now found, once broken but now whole, stepped forward into that bright future, ready to continue the work of changing the world, one ethical decision at a time. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.